Can you hear me? Is that better? Can you hear me now? What a fantastic start. Morning, everybody, to conference. I'm pleased to introduce Sal Brinton, President of the Liberal Democrats.
Well, good morning, everybody, and isn't it wonderful to be here in Southport? And bear with me, this is going to sound a slightly bizarre start, but about 35 years ago, sitting in the Opera House cafeteria with some of the technical staff, we were in a long gap between in intervals, talking about Donizetti operas and how he was passionate about setting them in the UK. So he wrote Anna Bolena, he wrote Lucia di Lammermoor, he wrote Maria Stuarta, and he also wrote Emilia di Liverpool. Now, not much of Emilia di Liverpool happens in Liverpool. First of all, the pirates arrive at a port north of Liverpool, Southport. The heroine who has been kidnapped by the pirates is taken to a village just north of Liverpool in the hills. Liverpool Walton, possibly Bootle. But the key bit of the story is when the brigands come down from the hills, and that can only be Ormskirk. So, if you haven't heard Emilia di Liverpool, which was a revive for the Liverpool Year of Culture, you really should. It's all about Sefton Borough Council areas. Oh dear. Now, I think it's really important that we recognise the Liberal Democrats in Southport and their achievements over the years. Wikipedia says that the seat has only ever been Liberal or Conservative and Lib Dem. And Ronnie Fearn, and then after him John Pugh, were brilliant MPs for the area. And I've already had 2 members tell me that when they arrived and they got a taxi from the station, the taxi driver said, "Oh, that John Pugh, absolutely brilliant. He really understands his community." Well, when John stood down last year, he also stood for a by-election in November, one of our many by-election victories that Joe talked about, and he won it, and he is now group leader of our group of 16 on the council. And I think we miss him in Parliament, but I can think of no better place to have someone leading a growing and thriving Lib Dem group than John Pugh. So thank you, John, and councillors in Sefton. And last time we came here, 2004, I think it was, this place was just about to be rebuilt. And isn't the new convention centre wonderful? The hotels, the space, I mean, it is just glorious, and it's a delight to be here. Today's not very good weather, but I know that the weather forecast is better tomorrow. So after Vince's speech, if you've got a moment, certainly take a walk along the promenade. It's looking really good. But that's enough about the place. As we start this conference today on our 30th birthday, I'm delighted that we are debating, as ever, major topics where we hope in the future we will be able to, either in government or influencing government, get some real change that will affect people for the better. And your votes in making that happen will be absolutely key. So enjoy conference, and thank you for being here at this unearthly hour.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to see the microphones working now, nice and clearly. Okay, I'd like to thank my aides there, Liz Lynn and Cara Jenkinson. I'd like to hand over now to James Girling, who's chair of the Federal Campaigns and Elections Committee for F2, that's the Report Federal Conference Committee. Thank you.
Good morning, conference. We're running slightly ahead of time, as you'll have noticed. We're going to move on to the The first two of the reports to conference, which are in your reports to conference booklet. The first is from the Federal Conference Committee, and I'm very pleased to call Andrew Wiseman, who is chair of the FCC, to move his report and to answer your questions. Andrew.
Thank you very much, James, and can I extend my welcome to everyone to Southport. I'm not going to read out my report. I'm assuming that those of you that are interested have read it, and those of you who aren't interested won't read it and won't listen to me even if I read it out. So I just really want to highlight two things in the report, and they're basically requests for you to take a bit of action. The first one is, after conference, we send out a questionnaire. It's an online questionnaire, takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. It's a feedback on your views of this conference, your views of the conference centre, what the conference committee, as the organising committee, has done well and what we could improve on. It is incredibly useful to us. Your responses are very helpful and we do take them into account. So please do complete that questionnaire. And the second thing I'd like to ask is to see how many of you would like to donate some money to the party. So how many of you would like to donate some money to the party? Now don't worry, I haven't suddenly become the treasurer and this isn't part of the appeal. But how many of you would like to donate some money to the party that won't cost you a penny? Because there is a way that you can do that. We sent out an email, and if you deleted the email without reading it, then you can pick up a copy of this form from the information desk. And this form basically asks you where you stayed when you were at Southport, how many nights you stayed, and how much you paid for your accommodation. If you fill out that form, we will submit it to the local authority, and the local authority will give some money back to the Liberal Democrats. So they want to know where you've stayed, they want to know the price of the accommodation, so they want to see how many people have come to conference and stayed in the local area. So please do fill out that form. If you don't have a copy of that form, then please get a copy from the information desk, because completing it will give us some extra money, which will be most appreciated. It can be done online as well, but if not, as I say, there are paper copies on the information desk. That's the end of my report. I'm more than happy to take the questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. The questions are on page 10 of the conference daily that you received as you came in, hopefully. I'm not going to read those out. So if we could we'll take them each in turn. The first question is from Malcolm Mitchell. Andrew, if you'd like to respond to that. And Malcolm, if you have a supplementary, could you stand by and we'll take those from the intervention mic over there.
Malcolm's question relates to the consultation sessions on Friday afternoon. I apologise if it wasn't clear to people that we have consultation sessions on the Friday afternoon. At every spring conference, we always have consultation sessions on the Friday afternoon. If it wasn't clear, then we need to have a look at the emails and the literature we send out to make that clear. But certainly, every single spring conference, we always have consultation sessions on the Friday afternoon before the rally, which is on the Friday evening, and then the formal opening of conference, which this session is.
Malcolm, I don't know if I can't see anybody at the mic. Are you going to the mic now? Excellent. Okay. If you'd like to ask your supplementary question.
It's basically, can you make sure that when the early bird registration opens, when you're doing the registration, this is also made clear as well? Because I had booked my train assuming there was nothing happening till about 4:30. When I found that there were these sessions at 3 o'clock, I then had to get a single ticket up here as well.
Yeah, certainly we'll look at that and make sure that it is quite clear that there are sessions on the Friday afternoon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. The second question is from Theo Butt-Philip.
Thank you, Theo. Relating to the allocation of training rooms. The way this works is the conference committee basically provides a series of training rooms, and it's then up to HQ to allocate those training rooms to whichever groups, whichever training they want to. In some venues, we have more training rooms than others, and it is very much venue dependent. It is also dependent on the number of fringe meetings that we have organised and the number of fringe meeting hotels that we have, because if there are extra rooms that are spare, that aren't being used during the fringe meeting slots, then they are often available for training. But it does depend on the venues. It does change quite a lot from venue to venue. It does change from year to year, and it is budget dependent as well. The conference committee, we have a limited budget in terms of the number of hotels that we can block book and the number of rooms we can block book.
Thank you. Theo, you have a supplementary question.
If members are concerned that not sufficient priority is being given to providing facilities for the campaign for gender balance to train at conference, to whom should they speak?
I think the first port of call would be to speak to the campaign for gender balance, for them to liaise with the training people at HQ and look at how many rooms can be provided and what their requirements are compared with the rest of the parties.
Thank you. Question 3 is submitted by Sarah Brown and relating to fair hearing for motions being submitted to FCC. Andrew.
Well, I can assure Sarah and anybody else that is interested that we give all motions a fair hearing in terms of deciding which ones to select. And the motion that she refers to, which I haven't seen yet because I don't think it's even been drafted, will receive the same hearing as any other motion. It will depend on how well drafted it is, what topic it is on, when it is submitted, and what else is on the agenda.
Sarah, do you have a supplementary question? I don't see anybody at the intervention mic, so we're going to move to question 4, which is submitted by Jenny Rigg.
Thank you. So Jenny asked about the drafting advice service that the Federal Conference Committee supplies. As I understand it, the Ashdown Prize competition is going to come up with a motion. Whether that is well drafted will depend on who drafts it. The Conference Committee offers a drafting advice service, so members who want to submit a motion, they're welcome to submit it in draft form at an earlier stage, and we will give some feedback on not the policy content of it, but the format and whether it is drafted in a way that we would normally accept. I can't comment on how the Ashdown Prize competition will be drafted because I don't know. I'm not part of that process. But what I can say to members is the drafting advice service is very good, and in fact the person who asked this question is one of the people that provides the drafting advice.
I don't know, Jenny, if you have a supplemental question you wish to ask. Okay, thank you. That concludes the questions on your paper for the FCC report. So I'm going to ask you now to whether to accept or reject the report of the Federal Conference Committee. So if you can get your passes out, show them to us clearly. We'll move to a quick vote on that. Can I see all those in favour, please, of accepting the FCC report? Thank you very much. And any against? I don't see any against, so that is clearly carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to F3, which is the report of the Federal Policy Committee, which Duncan Brack is going to move. Again, the questions relating to The FPC report are on your daily announcements sheets in front of you, and we'll move to those once Duncan has moved his committee's report.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Andrew, for just telling me I can talk for as long as I want. So I'll just read out the report word for word. So for those of you who haven't read it, I'll give you the highlights. So we've been able to get our policy paper schedule back on track now after the disruption obviously caused by the 2017 election. So you will see the policy papers that we are intending to produce listed in the report. We have 2 for this conference on education and on rural communities, which will both be debated today. We'll be producing 4 for the autumn conference in Brighton on 21st century economy, on Britain in the world, on immigration and identity, and on power to the people, which is primarily about local government and decentralisation. And in addition to that, we are intending to produce a short policy themes paper, what we're calling for want of a better title, which summarises the case for the Liberal Democrats, the point of this party. That'll be a crucial paper, I think, for us to debate, particularly given the large influx in membership we've had over the last couple of years, and assuming we have an election before 2022, which is entirely possible, it will help us in getting the next manifesto ready. So I hope you will be able to organise discussions in your local parties around that, and of course we'll have the debate in Brighton. For spring conference next year, we're planning 1 policy paper on race equality, and then after this conference we will be setting up 3 new policy working groups which will aim to produce papers for the autumn 2019 conference. We're planning a year and a half ahead, and those 3 will be on health, on climate change and the low carbon economy, and on crime and policing. So look out for adverts for membership for those working groups. We don't only work through policy papers, we also put shorter motions to you at conference, and I hope many of you were able to attend the consultation session we organised yesterday on tuition fees and higher education funding. Obviously a key issue, a tricky and sensitive issue for the party, but something we have to have a reasonable answer to. So we'll be aiming to produce a motion for you debate in the autumn, and do respond to the consultation paper. Comments are very welcome. We make various attempts to engage the membership in discussion and make it easy, provide materials and encouragement for local parties and other groups of party members discussing policy. And you can see what we've done on page 10 of the report. In particular, I draw your attention to the 2 pocket guides we produced for last autumn conference. They're on sale at the Lib Dem image stand. One is just a short pocket guide to Lib Dem policy. It lists all our key issues. And the other one is a more narrative guide to the party's approach, our philosophy and our basic beliefs. You'll also see in the report on pages 11 to 12 a list of our liaison people. We assign FPC members to every English region and also SAO. So please make use of us. There are contact details there, and they're all online as well. Make use of us if you want to get any advice or help or have any questions about the policy-making process or party policy. Finally, just to add to the report, we maintain a policy equality impact assessment group which looks at our draft policy papers in preparation and makes sure they fully take into account any impact on equalities issues. I'd like to thank Gareth Epps here, who stepped down from the role of chairing that group a year ago, who set much of the groundwork for the system that we now use. And I'd like to thank Belinda Brooks-Gordon for running the group for the last year, and welcome Lizzie Jukes, who's taking over from her from this conference. So finally, I just want to say thank you very much to all those of you who are involved in the policy-making process, whether you're debating papers at your local party or here at conference, to all those who serve on working groups, which is a difficult and often thankless task, and particularly to the staff of the policy unit, Christian Moon, Jonathan Everett, and Andrea Howe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan. It's not often that the Vice Chair of the FPC is told they can speak for as long as they like, and you've been provided a very illuminating insight into what you've been up to.
There's no need to be sarcastic.
Way too early in the morning for sarcasm. We have 2 questions listed. The first is from David Grace. Duncan.
So thank you, David. Thank you very much for the question. It's in 2 parts. One is about the transparency of the process by which we appoint working group members. Working groups prepare the drafts of the papers for us on the FPC to submit to conference. Obviously, it's the FPC that is the final decision-making body, but the people on the working groups who we appoint largely because of their expertise and their knowledge of the topic area, obviously have a key role to play. Now, we tell you what working groups we're planning to appoint a long way in advance. I've just gone through the next 2 years' worth of conferences, so you know what working groups are coming up. We always report this in FPC reports to conference, and we update this on our own FPC Facebook website, website page, which I invite you to join, and also on Lib Dem Voice. When we're setting up groups, we advertise through the same routes, through the Facebook page and through Lib Dem Voice, and through the party's email to activists, which goes out to several thousand people. We also contact any relevant SAOs or AOs within the party who might be interested. By doing this in the last few years, we've increased the number of applications we typically get from maybe something like 50 or 60, what it used to be, to more like 300 or 400 now per working group, of which we're aiming to appoint about 15 to 20. The second part of the question is about participation, particularly participation in working group meetings, particularly for those people from outside the southeast. We do tend to have meetings in London, not always, but usually we do, because that's where we have party headquarters and party staff, and that's where parliamentarians can get involved in the working groups. We don't have a budget. The FPC has no budget to do anything, including supporting people from outside London who need to travel. Some working groups have operated pool fares system, where everybody pays the average of the costs, and thank you to your question, David, we will come back to this issue at our next FPC in 3 weeks' time and discuss whether we're going to make that mandatory for working group participation. And we also hope to make more use of technology, not telephone conferencing, which is always a bit unsatisfactory, but video links, where we have the facilities to do that.
Thank you. David, do you have a supplementary?
I'd like to thank FPC for what they've done on these issues, but I would like to ask you to do more. Because are you aware that thousands of new members that we have now, as well as existing members, quite often don't know how to get involved in the working groups and don't know about them? People are always asking me this question. And the other thing is that the lack of any financial arrangement, and the travel pool is what I suggest, means that the groups do tend to be dominated by people who are living in or near London. And it's not just the lack of fairness to people living further away, it also distorts the kind of policies that come out of those groups.
Thank you, David. As I said, we will be coming back to this issue at our next meeting, and thank you for the prompt in doing that. I would, though, emphasise the fact that working groups are relatively small, typically 15 to 20 people, maybe up to 30 in some cases. So, they're never going to be able to involve a very representative group or a very large group of the party membership. So that's why we put a lot of emphasis on making it easier for people to discuss the consultation papers and the policy papers that we produce in their local parties and regional parties and here at Federal Conference. And that's a better route, I think, to achieving greater participation in the policy-making process.
Thank you. We now move to question 2, which is submitted by Jenny Rigg.
Thank you very much. The question is about whether the FPC has a view on the Your Liberal Britain group, and the answer is no, we don't have a view on the Your Liberal Britain group, or indeed on any other party group. We did discuss with Your Liberal Britain people their idea of the production of the vision document, which, as you will see, is coming to, or is being distributed at this conference, and is referenced in the Federal Board strategy motion tomorrow. We discussed whether FPC wanted to have a formal role in producing that document and decided we didn't. So that's going back a couple of years now. Our membership engagement group receives occasional reports from Your Liberal Britain on what they're doing, because what I would say is that Your Liberal Britain has an exceptionally good record at involving people in policy debate. More than 7,000 people were involved in debating and producing the vision document, and that's exactly the kind of activity that we want to promote and encourage, and we will promote and encourage that whether it's produced by Your Liberal Britain or by any other party group.
Thank you. Jenny, I don't see you at the intervention mic, so I'm presuming there is no supplemental question, which means that we will then move on to the vote as to whether to accept or reject the report of the Federal Policy Committee. Can I see all those, please, in favour of receiving the Federal Policy Committee report? Thank you very much. And those against? I see one, but otherwise that is clearly carried. So thank you very much, Conference, for those discussions and contributions. We are running a little bit ahead of time because people are still coming through the security system. We're going to start as promptly as we can at 9:30, but there will now be a short pause before handing over to the next chair, which is Jenny Rigg. Can I thank my aides, Jenny Lang and Jeff Payne.
Just before we start to do F4, local government and housing, I have a little announcement. Apparently some people have had difficulty finding the accessible entrance. You have to go down the side of this side of the theatre and you come in through that doorway there. So it's the west entrance. So when Mr Costa from Haringey to stand by to move the amendment. And if I can please call Vera Hobhouse, our MP for Bath and our party's spokesperson on communities and local government, who is going to propose the motion.
Well, good morning, conference. It's a great pleasure to be here and to see you all this morning. The guys who put together the conference program must have known that I am an early riser. Not, especially not on a Saturday morning, but here I am. And there are a few things that get me out of bed, and so it seems you as well. And that is the appalling state of housing in our country. It is correctly called a crisis. We can no longer ignore it, and we must do something about it. Conference, the cost of housing is now by far the largest expense in a person's monthly budget. But while wages for many have been stagnating for years, the cost of housing keeps rising. And the crisis is particularly acute for young people. The government keeps talking about a country of homeowners. What country are they living in? Home ownership for the 25 to 40-year-olds has fallen to 20%. For a vast number of people, the dream of home ownership will never be achievable. And the only alternative is private renting as the only way to get a roof over your head. And for those who can't afford the rising cost of private rents, homelessness is only one step away. Statistics show that the number one reason for homelessness now is the end of a private sector tenancy. The crisis affects children directly too. 128 children this Christmas were living in temporary accommodation because councils do not have the social homes we need to give them a home. And here is the root of the problem, the dramatic shortfall of social housing. All political parties agree now that we should build around 300,000 new homes each year. But unless a large proportion of that number are social housing, we will not address the housing crisis for those for whom it is a human crisis. In Parliament, government ministers don't mention social housing. Right to buy is draining away the social housing stock. The trend has actually been going on for decades. During 13 years of Labour, 330,000 social homes were lost. Under the coalition government, that trend was paused. But since 2015, left to their own devices, the Tory government has allowed the number of council homes in Britain to fall to a record low. And no wonder. The financial shortfall created by selling council homes at a large discount means that unless the government provides large subsidies to social housing providers, new social homes simply do not see the light of day. In 2016-17, 12,600 homes were sold under right to buy, while only just under 5,000 new social homes were built in the same period of time. A home that sells for about £350,000 in the private sector needs about £200,000 public subsidy for it to become a home for social rent. And that is according to the largest housing association in my constituency in Bath. But instead of public sector subsidies and allowing councils to borrow again, the Tories subsidise first-time buyers. This just keeps house prices high and the profit goes straight into the pocket of private house builders. Conference, we have learned the hard way that the private sector will not build the social and affordable homes we need. Only last week, Andrew Whittaker from the Homes Builders Federation said on Radio 4 that the core function of the private house builders is to make a profit. Surprise, surprise. This current Tory government tries to solve every problem through private business and private ownership, and by doing so, they are destroying the welfare state. The welfare state was created by a liberal beverage. Conference, we cannot ignore what the Tories are doing to the welfare state. They are, slice by slice, policy by policy, destroying beverage and our Liberal Democrat vision for a country that supports those most in need and give them a chance to flourish. Social housing is one of the foundations of the welfare state. Right to buy would be great if the state built new social homes to replace the ones that have been sold. But the Conservatives don't, they never will. We Liberal Democrats believe in the public good of social housing. The lives of each and every one of us is enhanced by a secure home to live in. It is a place to come back to each day, to relax, to eat, to sleep, a place to keep things. It is a place to share with others, a place to be yourself. It is a safe space, it is a state that provides where necessary that secure home. This is what we Liberal Democrats mean when we say a house is a home, not a financial asset. Conference, this motion proposes 6 practical policies to reverse the housing crisis. We must campaign for social and affordable housing at all levels, but most effectively, we will do this at a local level. That's you. Challenge developers, challenge the local authority, challenge the other parties on your council about the number of social and affordable homes that are actually built in each development. Let's build the right houses for our communities. Fight for social housing. Fight for truly affordable housing. Conference, please support this motion.
Thank you, Vera. Can Laura Gordon from Sheffield stand by, please? And I now call Nicholas da Costa from Haringey, who is a council candidate in Haringey and also a member of FCC.
Conference, we simply do not have enough homes. As Vera Hobhouse said, we need a radical house building approach across our country. 300,000 homes is great, but we need so many more. I applaud this motion. It is excellent. It brings more empty houses into use and ensures that we are developing more houses. But across the UK, not only the Tories but Labour are letting us down on house building, and specifically social and affordable homes. We need to empower more local authorities to build more homes. However, we have to assure that we're providing truly affordable and truly social homes, and that these people aren't being segregated within developments. We're being let down by Labour in Haringey. We have a council that has a shortage of 10,000 homes and a waiting list of 10,000 homes and 3,000 people in temporary accommodation. Indeed, we have a Labour council in Haringey that has only had a net increase of 30 homes, social homes, in 30 years. That is unacceptable. Yet Haringey Council, the Labour Council, has kowtowed to big development. On Right to Buy, it's returned £29 million to the government because it hasn't built its own houses. So finally, after years of mismanagement in Haringey, Claire Cober, the soon-to-be former leader of Haringey Council, announces the grand development plan, the Haringey Development Vehicle. Sounds pretty grand. Well, it is to some extent. It involves the privatisation of £2 billion worth of council property, land, libraries, schools, council buildings, care homes, into a development company with an Australian company called Lendlease. To build more homes, yes, but no increase in social homes, and that's what we so desperately need. Furthermore than that, regeneration is the name of the game at the moment across so many urban areas, but we need to ensure that regeneration brings good communities and doesn't result in segregation. The Labour Council in Haringey and Labour councils across so many parts of the UK have said that poor doors will be the name of the game in these developments. Now, to those of you who don't know what poor doors are, those are the doors for the have-nots. The haves, the luxury developments, will have their grand entrance with a concierge service and 3 lifts and creative water features, whilst the social tenants will have one door, probably next to the bins, with 1 lift, probably a bit close to the fire escape, just round the corner away from the concierge. And as Liberal Democrats, as believers in freedom and equality, we need to ensure that we do not allow poor doors in developments. We need to legislate against poor doors, because you should not have segregation within developments. We should celebrate the work of the Lib Dem Council in Sutton that has developed its own in-house development company to ensure they can deliver truly affordable and social homes. This is an issue that's faced across the UK in multiple urban areas. As I said, we need to protect social homes, we need to build more social homes, and we need to build communities where people can afford to live and are not pushed round the corners by the bins. I urge you to support the amendment and then the motion as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Can I ask Tom Morrison from Cheadle to stand by, please? And I now call Laura Gordon, who is our PPC for Sheffield Hallam.
So yesterday, I overcame the odds and completed the purchase of my first home, which was very exciting. But the fact is that I'm a middle-class professional in my 30s, married to another middle-class professional in my 30s who lives in the north. Like, if I can't buy, I've only just managed to buy my own home because I lived overseas not paying rent for 5 years. If I can't buy, who can? So I mean, we have a massive housing crisis that is preventing people from getting on the housing ladder. But that's not what I want to talk about, because I don't think that's where the real sharp end of our housing crisis is. It's at the other end where people can't get into social housing and are stuck in private rental for long periods of time, sometimes decades, having to move house frequently, having inadequate housing, being faced with landlords who won't allow DSS, which I think has now been declared illegal, but they're still doing it. And meaning that people are forced into housing that is often inadequate, often poorly maintained, and always overpriced for what it is, because that is the only thing that you can get if you have the temerity to be on housing benefit, if you have the audacity to dare to be on a poor and on a low wage. This is not the way that we should be treating people. This is not an acceptable way to treat citizens who just need a little bit of a hand up. And the other thing I think we have to remember here is this isn't a neutral issue. This is a women's issue. The vast majority of housing benefit claimants are women, especially women over 65 and women between 25 and 45 who have dependent children. There are all sorts of structural reasons for this. It touches on things like the gender pay gap, childcare, pensions, all sorts of issues. But the fact is, we have to remember that the people that are affected by this primarily are women and families. Children who are having to move house year in, year out, affecting their education, and that means that they don't have the access to consistent schooling. It's bad for us. It costs us £24 billion a year. And the only people it's good for is landlords, because landlords are getting that money, taking the houses that used to be social houses bought under right to buy, and then renting them out again so that people can't buy them and people can't rent them at social rents. This is a liberal motion. It is true to our values, bringing control, bringing power back to local level and enabling local communities and local councils, democratically elected, to make the decisions that affect their local areas. We can solve it by moving that power locally, allowing councils to invest to build without these PPI deals that we've just been hearing about in Haringey, without having to rely on bringing in that private sector money and getting rid of assets that we need that we can't then get back, and allowing them to control what is sold off through the right to buy locally. This is a liberal motion. It won't solve the crisis, but it will help address a large part of the crisis. Please pass the motion.
Thank you, Laura. Can I please ask George Rice from Manchester Central, Gorton and Blackley to stand by, and I now call Tom Morrison from Cheadle.
Good morning, Conference. Conference, the authors of this motion really hit the point, where they say that houses are too often viewed as financial assets rather than homes. And this explains completely what is wrong with this Conservative government. I was raised in a council property, and I can say hands down that the stability that my family home provided was integral to helping me grow and develop throughout my teenage years. But stories such as mine are becoming less and less commonplace. Today, families often have no choice but to turn to the private rented sector. Now, I'm not going to go and batter all private landlords, many of whom provide high-quality housing. However, but as in life, there is a spiteful minority that abuse the system and treat their tenants as expendable consumers rather than homemakers. And it's this situation that has played a huge, huge part in driving homelessness around this country. In my area of Greater Manchester, homelessness has grown by over 24%. And that makes almost 1 in every 633 people living without a permanent roof over their head. Conference, that's unacceptable, and it needs to change now. The Conservatives have offered us nothing. This week saw Theresa May apparently make a grand housing scheme announcement, which promised huge proposals to help solve the housing crisis. Well, thanks for wasting our time. It's clear that apart from shallow platitudes, baseless attacks on local government, and pathetic virtue signalling, this government is out of ideas, it's out of touch, and it's running out of time. So it's up to the Liberal Democrats to take up the mantle and drive positive change so we can start building the homes we need. That said, as much as I support the motion, and I also support the amendment, and I hope you do too, I believe we need further work to make sure that the country has enough houses to fill the demand for generations to come. Ending the housing crisis cannot be boiled down to providing more affordable homes, social housing, and empowering housing cooperatives. It's a complex issue that requires investment in our country's planning authorities and town planners. It needs a radical reform of our planning system so developers and communities can work together to create the housing that's needed. And we need to create meaningful land allocations that protects the environment and also supports the development of sustainable housing. Conference, I'm calling on you to support the motion, but I'm demanding that we start looking at the details on how we can solve the housing crisis and support our constituents for years to come.
Thank you, Tom. Can I ask Suzanne Fletcher from Stockton to stand by, please? And I now call George Rice from Manchester Central, Gorton and Blackley. George is a first-time speaker at conference.
Thanks very much. So, as the chair rightly said, I'm currently the council candidate for Deansgate Ward in Manchester City Centre. But when I'm not doing that, I am an 18-year-old university student, which means I am part of the generation that is disproportionately out of reach of owning their own home. I suppose you could say I'm part of Generation Rent. The main reason for me that conference should vote for this motion is its emphasis on the responsibility of local government. And that is especially important this week in Manchester, after it was announced that 15,000 homes in Manchester City Centre are being built and not one of them is affordable. And this is as a result of irresponsible strategic regeneration frameworks sanctioned by the council. It's because of irresponsible management of City Centre, and it's because of irresponsible and self-serving Labour councillors. Most importantly, though, this motion realises that for my generation, housing is not a question of assets or council planning, but rather it is a question of having somewhere to call your own and somewhere to call home. The motion empowers local councils to look out for their constituents, and as someone seeking to be a councillor, having this motion behind me would give me a tool to tackle Manchester's growing homelessness crisis. This motion, as Laura Gordon rightly said, at its core is liberal, as it empowers local government and it empowers people like me to one day own their own homes. And therefore, I would urge you all to vote in favour of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Can I ask Dave Ryder-Mills from Kingston Borough to stand by, please? And I now call Suzanne Fletcher from Stockton.
Morning. What I want to talk about is something not actually in this excellent paper, which is about being able to build on brownfield sites. We've got a lot of post-industrial sites that are heavily contaminated and therefore can't possibly have housing built upon them. We've got a lot of them in the northeast, I know they're in Pendle, they're elsewhere in the northwest and around the country. Now, at one time, you could get a government grant that would have cleaned up such land and made it possible to be built on, and that was good. but no longer. For quite a lot of years, no money is available for that. If a developer wants to build on the land, it just isn't worth their while to have to pay to clean up the land and then build on it for houses that would be very expensive indeed, which aren't what are needed in the heart of our urban areas, and they're probably not going to sell anyway. So it just remains post-industrial. In Stockton and Middlesbrough, we've got what we call the blue-green heart, where there's ambitious and good plans to be able to really put the heart back into our community. But the blue-green heart is a grey sludge. Nothing can happen on it. Nobody can afford to do anything about it. And of course, that means that we have a lot of controversial planning applications on the greenfield areas around the edge, where there's little or no public transport, no social facilities, lots of traffic jams, and it really isn't a good idea. But if we had the money to actually clean up that land, we could have sustainable housing where there would be public transport if needed, a lot of it in walking distance, local facilities, and it would provide much needed social housing, which of course we've all heard about the need for that. It ticks all the boxes, so I'm urging our party to please campaign on that issue and make a noise, make a fuss to be able to get that money. And the other thing, just briefly to mention, is the need. It's not just about bricks and mortar, something else mentioned and not mentioned in the motion, but it's about the need for supported housing for people with mental health issues, addiction issues, where they need somewhere where they can be supported and then be able to gradually move on to a different sort of housing. So please bear that in mind when you're out there campaigning. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Suzanne. Can I ask John Shipley from Newcastle upon Tyne to stand by? And I now call Dave Ryder-Mills from Kingston Borough.
Thank you. Good morning, Conference. You might have heard of Kingston and Surbiton. It's one of the 12 lucky places in the country to have a Liberal Democrat MP. But it's less likely you've heard of Norbiton. It's just the other side of Kingston to Surbiton. And it's the one bit of Kingston Borough to regularly include one of the most deprived areas in the whole country, according to the NHS. We unfortunately still have a Tory council administration, hopefully shortly to change this May to us. Their solution is to demolish the large 1960s built council estate and rebuild at 3 times the density, but with barely the same number of social housing units, just enough to rehouse the current tenants with secure tenure. And this having reduced the numbers to a minimum by having spent some time only allowing new, unsecured, temporary lets. In the last year, they've actually managed to demolish more affordable units than they've built. However, over the years, many units have been sold leasehold or freehold under the right to buy. Many of these are now in the hands of buy-to-let owners, some of whom let back to people on the housing waiting lists at up to twice the rent of council-owned properties next door. The Tory answer? Raise the council rents to temporary tenants to the level of the private lets to improve fairness. After all, they argue, rents are largely covered by housing benefit, so it's just moving money from one fund to another. No thought of the consequences in terms of benefits traps. Lines 64 and 65 are not strong enough. We need to stop right of buy completely before it causes even more damage. Add to this the fact that until recently, Kingston officially only had 10 to 12 people identified as street homeless. Recently, regular lunches organised by residents and local churches in Norbiton have attracted more than 40 guests in Norbiton Ward alone. These burgeoning numbers are a disgrace in an affluent part of an affluent country. The other actions suggested by this excellent motion and amendment are not just needed, they're long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Can I ask John Bridges from Manchester Central, Gorton and Blackley to stand by? And I now call John Shipley from Newcastle upon Tyne, who is a Liberal Democrat member of the House of Lords.
Well, Conference, in supporting the motion, I want to talk about the values that I think should underpin our housing policies. As a member of the House of Lords, I, with several colleagues, speak very frequently on our housing crisis and what should be done. But underpinning what we say are several values which I hope you will want to share. One evening, while speaking with colleagues in Southwark, we discussed creating a value about real affordability of housing, and we said this: everyone on the living wage should be able to afford to live reasonably close to where they work in conditions which are safe and secure. And to that we can add that no one should be forced to spend more than a third of their income on housing costs. And further, that no child should be forced to move schools and away from friends because a landlord serves notice to quit, because that landlord can command a higher rent if the existing tenants leave. And further, that no one should be forced to sleep rough or depend on temporary accommodation when they cannot find a permanent place to call home. Conference, we all know that we face a housing crisis which continues to get worse. And the reason is that we have built 100,000 homes too few every year for the past 20 years. The result is that 1 in 5 of our households is now in the private rented sector in conditions which can be very poor but expensive, with a tenure which can be insecure. The government has spent too high a proportion of its spending on subsidies for owner occupation, pushing up house prices at the expense of building social homes for rent. And as we now know, Help to Buy has fueled the share prices of large builders, resulting in some unjustifiable bonuses for a lucky few at the top. Meanwhile, large builders can hoard land with planning permission as they await rising land values. And too many large builders misuse viability assessments on affordable housing. Several years ago, our party adopted a policy of building 300,000 new homes a year, and the government now accepts that figure. But it will never achieve it unless it unlocks the capacity of local government to solve the crisis and get more homes built at prices which are genuinely affordable. And that is the purpose of this motion. It puts local authorities at the heart of solving our housing crisis, and it identifies how we should address the failures of our housing provision. Conference, I hope you will support this motion.
Thank you, Lord Shipley. Can I ask Heather Kidd from Ludlow to stand by? And I now call John Bridges from Manchester Central, Gorton and Blackley.
Hello, my name's John Bridges and I'm the PPC for Manchester Central and a candidate in the local council elections this May. The plight of those sleeping rough on our streets is truly an indictment of both the current government and also of society as a whole. If this country cared enough about this evil, it could and would be eradicated. It not only blights the lives of individuals directly affected, but it also impacts on those living and working around them. I often wonder if this clear reminder of government social policy failure is left by Labour local government administrations largely untouched to remind voters daily of Tory neglect. That might seem a harsh charge, and in truth it is a complicated and growing problem under all administrations. But growing and complicated does not mean insoluble in one of the world's wealthiest countries. It's about your political will to tackle the problem. In Manchester, where 189 people sleep rough every night on current estimates, a 41% growth since last year, and it has quadrupled since 2010, we have a new Labour Metro Mayor, Andy Burnham, who signalled his caring intent in his election campaign by donating a percentage of his salary to a fund for the homeless. That fund has so far raised around £100,000 to tackle the problem, and he's promised to eradicate it by 2020. But yet, the numbers still increase, and there's only 2 years left to go. It was a political gesture, but in truth, we need a better funded approach to this. And there is a fundamental rift here between the good intentions of a mayor and Manchester City Council that holds the real power in the issues that concern us here. This motion calls in line 74 of section 6, for the receipts of council house sales to be spent on the provision of affordable housing. But we have added in an accepted amendment a call for section 106 monies to be added to this fund, signalling our intent to put real money and real resources to this issue. In Manchester, despite 2,956 residential units being built in the city centre in the latest round of planning, none, that's none, and it repeats what was being said slightly earlier, will include any affordable properties at all, any. So much for the 20% target. There's 16,000 people on Manchester's housing waiting list. But Manchester leads the way on making it easy for developers. It has been dropping 106 agreements. It has been using national and regional capital loans to resource these private developments. It's allowed the 20% rule on affordable housing to be simply ignored, and it allowed itself to be blackmailed by undisclosed viability assessments referred to earlier. In particular, Manchester has an ongoing problem with Section 106 agreements. Academics have estimated that developers in Salford, next door, have avoided around £18 million in agreements. In Manchester, the number will be much higher, but the secretive processes of the council uses constrain the academic research.
To a close, please, John?
Sorry. Even in the councils themselves, when making planning decisions, were being left in the dark. No information was being provided when these agreements were being made. So our accepted amendment added the words and section 106 agreements to line 74 of the motion, and it is intended to put more money in the pot to tackle rough sleeping and re-emphasise the Liberal Democratic commitment to eradicate this scourge from our streets. Please vote for the motion and the amendment.
Thank you, John. Can I ask Simon Hughes from Bermondsey and Old Southwark to stand by? And I now call Councillor Heather Kidd from Ludlow.
Thank you, Conference. I've heard a huge amount about urban housing this morning. And what I'm here to do is put in a real plea for you to understand the difficulties of rural housing. The rural countryside is dying, and dying very quickly in many areas. Across Shropshire, we have small village schools that are collapsing, being closed, because families cannot afford to stay in the villages where they were born and brought up. They cannot afford to move into the villages where they need to work. And I still have members of my communities telling me that, in fact, there are no jobs in the countryside, that people don't need to live there. They've never heard of teachers, policemen, carers, people who man shops, who provide all those services that actually each and every one of us need every day. We have teachers who have to travel 30 and 40 miles just to come and work in our small schools. I have one small school that now has 3 village schools collapsed into it, so 3 whole catchment areas, and it still has only 92 children. And unless we start building, and building the right sort of housing, that school will be under threat very quickly. We no longer build to housing need. This government thinks housing need is housing numbers. It is not. Developers only want to build executive homes in the countryside with lovely views. And that just stokes an older population that's going to need a huge amount of care from the council. We have to now start looking at how we decide what housing we need. We have to look at land prices. We have to find ways of driving that down. Why should a farmer not sit on his land, which is worth 10 to 15,000 per acre, because that's going up too, when with one house on that site, he could probably get 70, 80, £100,000 if it's got a very good view. We have to attend to all of those things. I now, as a councillor, see schools in Shrewsbury overflowing because that's the only place that our families can live. And we have dormitory villages. We need to attack and find a way to fund the infrastructure onto sites. We need to have much more innovative and better trained planners who have a duty to provide a service to the communities and not be hidebound by rules that mean we only get the 5-bedroom house on a site where 2 semis were actually given the original planning permission. We need proper viability assessments on sites. We should never take money off sites for affordable housing because we've then not got the land to build on. We have to now attack all of that. Our problems are slightly different.
Can I ask you to draw your remarks to a close, please?
But they are in many ways very similar to the urban problems. Please support the whole of this and take on board rural issues, please.
Thank you, Heather. Can I ask Councillor Chris White to stand by, please? And I now call Simon Hughes from Bermondsey and Old Southwark.
Chair, thank you very much. Conference, good morning. I could spend lots of time attacking the Tories on housing, but I'm going to concentrate my words this morning on attacking Labour, because for many of us that's the challenge in the local elections this May, and it matters hugely. I just want to take a couple of Southwark examples. There are many developments in Southwark where there is 100% development, no affordable housing at all. Labour, when re-elected in 2010, promised to build 11,000 affordable homes, 11,000 homes. They've actually demolished or sold over 2,000. They have built less than 200. 1 in 4 of the homes on many of the developments have been sold abroad. And scandalously, there are now 5,000 empty homes. 1 in 9 of them are empty council homes. If that's not an unacceptable scandal, I don't know what is. Because housing is one of the most important issues, not generally in Britain, but particularly to young people, according to all opinion polls. And if we want to change Britain's future, we have to change housing policy. The amendment which I ask you to support doesn't condemn all development. Sometimes, as at the Haygate estate, you had to knock down an estate. The lifts didn't work, or the central heating doesn't work. But it wants to make absolutely clear that there must be consultation on development, and in particular, if there's a plan to take public land and hand it over for private development, the people must be involved. Secondly, as Nick argued in moving the amendment, we're not against mixed developments, but we're against the apartheid of mixed developments, which says if you're privately renting or purchasing, this is your part of the building. And if you're less able to afford, then you go through another door somewhere else. That's unacceptable. We want shared living. We want communities to be kept together. And we want to add 3 things that I draw your attention to, conference. Firstly, that we should always seek to provide for shared ownership. It's a way of people building from rent to ownership. We should always make sure there is a right to return, because that allows communities to stay together, not to be dispersed. And we should always make sure that every development has no reduction in social housing. As John said about Manchester, and I'd say about Southwark, the Labour Party often just cozies up to developers, and it excludes affordable housing from increasing numbers of development in urban and rural areas. So, conference. I hope that we'll get the message that in Southwark, Manchester, Haringey, and in rural councils where they're led by Labour, we should go on to the attack. We should campaign in the next few weeks like never before. We should expose Corbyn's Labour Party for the deception which they are. They went to the country saying they were for the many, not the few. In boroughs like mine, they are for the few and not the many. And we have to tell the country that loud and clear. Please support the amendment.
Thank you, Simon. I now call Councillor Chris White from St Albans to summate the motion.
Conference, good morning. We should not use the term crisis lightly, and for many of us there is no crisis at all. But our role as Liberal Democrats is to remember that for those who do face this crisis, it is very deep and it is often life long. Young people are now generationally excluded from home ownership, except for the fortunate 20%. There is a lack of social housing. Social housing, something seen as a blot by the Conservatives. Anyone thinking of Thatcher's legacy should remember that she is the one who wanted to dismantle housing estates and ultimately hand over those properties to the private sector with the consequences which have been described this morning. To add insult to injury, the current government now wants to subsidise first-time buyers instead, rather than tackling the real problem. So yet more money passed over to developers. Laura reminds us that private sector landlords are not the answer when they can discriminate against those on benefits, that this is a women's issue and it's an issue for children. Tom reminds us that council housing is not a dirty word, it's something which provided him and many others with family stability. But he reminds us that we do need radically to reform the planning system to achieve what we want. George, from Generation Rent, he reminds us that it is about councils. It is councils who have the solutions. We need to empower local government, but empower, in particular, Liberal Democrat local government. This is a campaigning issue. It's delightful at last to see a spring conference which has got motions we can use for campaigning purposes. Suzanne, concerned about clean-up costs of brownfield sites, another issue, but so I'll skip past it. Dave from Kingston, I have heard of Norbiton. I nearly went there. The Tories are redeveloping. Don't forget, we can attack Labour, but we must also attack the Tories on this. They're redeveloping locally without any real increase in social housing. What a surprise. John Shipley, everyone, this is a nice principle for us, everyone with a living wage should be able to afford to live reasonably close to where they work in conditions which are reasonable. No child should be forced to move schools because a landlord wishes to make greater profits. He reminds that 1 in 5 households in the private rental sector are in poor conditions. And, of course, any councillor would tell you, developers misuse viability assessments. But they also, John Bridges reminds us, there are issues about Section 106 monies. It is appalling in my area, in St Albans, to see how little is demanded of developers, how unrealistic the sums of money are, and how irrelevant the issues are. So getting proper demands in Section 106 and proper demands for social housing is something that we should support. Heather, thank you for coming up and reminding us that it is not just an urban issue. Rural areas are suffering as well. Rural areas in many parts are dying as the communities become unviable because not enough building is taking place. And Simon, of course, reminds us that Labour on this issue and on so many issues is for the few and not the many. I have to talk about the amendment. I'm not keen on the amendment, I have to say. The principles are right, but amendments should be on a federal level, not on a local level. It's a campaigning issue, but there is also the principles whether we should be legislating for something which should be council policy. Nevertheless, support it if you wish. I probably will not. But the key thing is we are fighting the Tories on this because they have wrecked the system. We're fighting Labour on this because they have failed to repair the system. We need to empower councils and make sure more councils are Liberal Democrat. Thank you, conference.
Thank you very much, Chris. We're now going to move to a set of 2 votes. Firstly, a vote to see whether or not we accept the amendment, and then a vote to see whether or not we accept the motion as amended or not, as the case may be. So if you can all get your cards ready, can I see those in favour of Amendment 1, please? Okay, thank you. And then can I see those against? There's a handful there, but it's very clearly passed. Okay, can I now see those in favour of the motion as amended by Amendment 1? Okay, and those against, please? I can't see any against, so that's very clearly passed. Can I thank all those speakers who kept to time? It did enable me to call a couple of extra people. And apologies to those that I couldn't call because we were slightly oversubscribed for this, which is great for a 9:30 in the morning debate. I'd like to thank my aide Alex Hegenbath and my hall aide Mary Reid, And I now hand over to Paul Tilsley, who is the chair of the next session. Thank you.
Good morning, Conference. The next debate is F5, exit from Brexit. Can I call upon the Right Honourable Tom Brake MP to move the motion?
Good. Great. Thank you. Good morning, Conference. Now, nearly 20 months have elapsed since that fatal day on the 23rd of June 2016. The numbness and disbelief I felt immediately afterwards has dissipated, but it's been replaced by white-hot rage. Rage at the arrogance of David Cameron, who has retired to the comfort of his designer shed. He leaves behind a country divided, north and south, old and young, British citizen and EU citizen, and he leaves a country alienated from its closest allies. Rage at Boris Johnson over Northern Ireland. On the 29th of February 2016, he told the BBC Brexit would leave arrangements on the Irish border absolutely unchanged. But now he concedes there will be some controls at the border, risking the whole peace process. This man is a compulsive and casual liar. Whether it is his flip-flops on the border issue or indeed on the NHS. It is because of you, Boris, that the very friendly German couple who run the guest house I am staying in here are uncertain about their futures and the future of their son in the United Kingdom. The Liberal Democrats will defend their rights and the rights of UK citizens in the EU. We demand that Theresa May ring-fence this issue now, so if no deal is reached, at least EU citizens who contribute so much to British society, from the high-tech and finance sectors to agriculture and hospitality, are protected. And by doing this, we will help protect UK citizens in the EU who were so cruelly disenfranchised in the referendum 20 months ago, just as were EU citizens and 16 and 17-year-olds. I rage at Jeremy Corbyn. Every week on Wednesdays at PMQs, he stares at an open goal. He places the ball very slowly, steps back, darts forward, and each and every time he skies it. Now, should my team, Crystal Palace, perform like this, we risk relegation. When the leader of the opposition does it, it's the whole country that goes down the pan. Now, the Prime Minister is accelerating towards the edge of the Brexit cliff. Meanwhile, Jeremy Corbyn blethers on about the EU's dastardly and entirely fictitious plans to stop him nationalising the railways. Corbyn is letting down all those young people who joined Labour because they thought that he would fight Brexit. I appeal to those young people. You have another home to go to. It is the Liberal Democrats. Join us. Corbyn is craven on Brexit. He will do nothing to secure their right to live, work and study abroad. And finally, I rage at our Prime Minister and I rage against the government machine. I asked her the following question on Monday. Is she willing to stand up for the majority in this country who do not want a disastrous hard Brexit and give Parliament and the public a meaningful vote that includes the option of staying in the EU and to vote for an exit from Brexit? Or will she let herself be dragged down by the inconsequential and deluded men who sit on her front bench and become the third Conservative Prime Minister in history to be brought down by Europe? Her answer? We gave the people a referendum, they voted, there will be no second referendum, no exit from Brexit, and we're leaving the EU and delivering on the vote of the people. So there you have it. In nearly 21 years as a Member of Parliament, I have never known a government to pursue so doggedly a course of action they know is already hurting us economically and will inflict further serious harm. The government's own impact assessment, which they did so much to try and hide from us, confirm this. But our rage is being converted into action. We are mobilising, joining forces with other parties, helping campaign groups pool resources, working on messages that are positive about Europe, that don't just highlight the steady flow of bad news stories. We're preparing the ground for a future vote. We will win this fight and defeat the forces of populism and isolationism. We are the Liberal Democrats. We will take the battle of Brexit to the Conservatives and Labour and win, no matter what the odds, and secure a vote on the deal and an exit from Brexit. We must do. The future of our country depends on it. Conference, back the motion.
Thank you, Tom. I now have to advise Conference that I have received a motion to suspend standing orders. I will now read out the request. Motion 17A, autumn 2017, was amended by Tom Brake, giving votes to 16 to 17-year-olds and EU citizens. Motion F5 today only states the British people. This is either careless, shorthand, or willful. F5 will supersede F17A. An amendment was submitted to restore EU citizens to the implied franchise. This was not called for debate. Conference should have the right to amend F5 or refer back and not let our EU friends down. We will therefore vote on that suspension of standing orders, and it is a simple majority. Yeah, the mini debate, sorry. My apologies. So, could I see all those in favour of the suspension of standing orders? Sorry, mini debate. Could I call Michael Kilpatrick? That's what I said. Right, yeah. Right, we're getting there. All those in favour of hearing the mini debate, could they please show? And all those against? Yes, we will hear the mini debate. Michael Kilpatrick, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed. It is somewhat embarrassing to have to interrupt a debate on Brexit, because there's nothing I'd hate more than have to vote against something which votes against Brexit. But the reason for this is really quite straightforward. It's a matter of that one word in one respect. The word British in line 34 appears to ignore what was said in F17A, and I think we just need to be careful with the wording, and that's all I was really requesting. Our amendment asked for the party to have a principle that at all general elections and referendums, that all foreign citizens who live here, who've shown a commitment to live here, should have the votes and everything. I'm married to a Czech scientist who pays more tax than I do, and she has no representation on the future of this country. So if I were able to request, all I would do was say, for the purpose of moving forward, please delete the word 34, from the word British, from line 34, and to say the people to have a final say. I'm not sure if we can do that, I'm just a little bit unhappy that the wording has somewhat carelessly ignored the detail of what appeared in F17A. So I don't know, Chair, if we're allowed to request that word to be deleted in any way, and what can happen as a result of the standing orders being suspended. So, if I've said what I need to say, then please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I call Jeff Payne to oppose, please?
Well, good morning, Conference. It falls to me to explain the decision of the FCC not to take the amendment, and the amendment wasn't as simple as has been suggested to you. This is a simple, short, focused debate on Brexit. It lasts 45 minutes. We haven't got a lot of time for amendments, but the amendment that was put in wasn't just about the word British in line 34. The reason we rejected it was for two other reasons, two other things the amendment said that we thought would cause problems. The first was to do with EU citizens' voting rights going forward beyond the referendum. We've already said that we would give EU citizens the right to vote in the referendum. That's clear. Tom said it. Other people have said it. It's quite clear that's our position. But this amendment will go much further and talk about EU voting rights way into the far distant future, and we thought that wasn't a debate we needed to have now in this limited time that we have. But the most important reason we rejected it was the amendment actually called for a situation where any foreign citizen who'd been resident in the UK for 5 years to have full voting rights. Now, that would substantially make worse the position of Commonwealth citizens who presently don't have to wait 5 years to vote. They can come and register immediately and vote. So we couldn't take the amendment for that technical reason. It would have made the position of Commonwealth students much worse, and we didn't think this was the right place for a vote and a debate on the position of Commonwealth, EU and UK citizens in referenda going forward for the next few decades in a short motion about Brexit. The removal of the word British in line 34 would complicate our message. We've always said the important thing is to give British people the vote in the referendum. That, of course, includes EU citizens because our spokespeople have said so. So I'd urge you not to suspend standing orders and complicate this debate. Let's have a debate on stopping Brexit, which is what this motion is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll now move to a vote. This requires a 2/3 majority. All those in favour of suspension of standing orders, will they please show their voting cards? All those against? That is overwhelmingly lost. I also have to advise you, to complicate matters even further, that we have a statement of reference back that I will take later in the debate. Can I now call Catherine Bearder, MEP? Please give her a round of applause for the work that she does.
You all know the story about the proud emperor who wanted a wonderful new suit of clothes. But his tailor, let's call them Boris and Nigel, thought they were onto a good thing. A magic suit full of promises. But you could only see it if you were wise and clever or believed in life outside the EU. Everyone believed the fibs, and Theresa said she loved the suit, or as she said this week, let's get it on. But you and I know, and millions of businesses know, there is no suit. Emperor Brexit is stark naked. The marvellous, stunning Brexit clothes promised are nowhere to be seen. We cannot be better dressed outside the European Union than we are as full members. We are a year into Brexit negotiations with still no plan, and my European colleagues are as bemused as you are. Now, the Tory party likes to masquerade as the party of business, yet we all know you can't build a business or even get past your bank manager without a business plan. David, Michael, Boris and Jacob, you should be helping your boss build her business plan. Yet 2 years after you lied to the country, we still have no sign of that plan. That is no way to run a business, let alone a country. It's a shameful and embarrassing state of affairs for our proud country. Conference, Liberal Democrats, how important is your future? Pretty important, I bet. You and your country deserve the right to decide on our future, our family's future, our children's future. Mrs. May has no answer to what that might be, but we have. Liberal Democrats have always said Brexit is wrong, and it still is. So we demand a vote on whatever the deal the Tories managed to cobble together. We demand a vote for our fellow citizens to determine their futures. After all, I will get a vote in the European Parliament. So let's start that campaign this morning by voting to support this motion, or as my hashtag says, give us a say, Mrs. May. Thank you very much, Conference.
Thank you very much. Could I now call Taryn Wilkins from North East Hertfordshire and ask Jazim Al-Kanani to stand by.
Hello, Conference. The last time I spoke here about Brexit, I explained how Norway participates in the single market without being a member of the European Union. Norway has an economic, not political relationship with the EU. The government has now agreed to stay aligned to the rules of the single market and customs union if no deal on the Irish border issue can be found. With negotiations going as they are, the Norway model therefore looks like the only viable option for this government. This is no bad thing, because for me, the Norway model is better than EU membership. It balances the concerns over economic stability, sovereignty, and our trading relationship with the EU more successfully than membership does. They have numerous opt-outs on areas of EU policy that are only direct contributions to the EU of programs they choose to take part in, and they have a full vote and seat at global bodies unlike EU members. They also have a break on EU immigration while still participating in the single market. The main worry I have about this motion is the proposed second referendum. This was our core policy at the last election, and it failed to attract the votes we so desperately needed. Another referendum on our membership would simply be a replay of last time, and I feel we need to use this as an opportunity to move forwards rather than replay old battles. We even risk becoming a single-issue party, which will not help us to build the broad coalition of Liberal voters we need to win an election. While I see issues with this motion, I think there are some solutions. I favour an alternative to another EU referendum, which is a referendum on our membership of the customs union and the single market. As for the main issues I think we should be focusing on, I think that should probably be education. These are solutions that are sadly not on offer with this motion, so please vote against it. Thank you.
Could I call Jazim Al-Kanani and ask Lisa Marie Bournemouth to stand by?
Good morning, Conference. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in this debate. I think the point that was made by Catherine earlier is an absolutely excellent point in general about why policy motion F5 is so important. The idea of undermining the role of business leaders in the private sector, which Theresa May has done throughout as a subtext, makes this motion all the more important. It's crucial that we create an essential pathway for voters who were not given full information, in the same way as a group of accountants or lawyers would be held accountable for lack of information to a corporate body in terms of advice. So the idea of lines 33 to 46, we have campaigned throughout to give that final say, and that is crucial. As well as that, I think we run the risk of not recognising that without addressing a firm idea of giving that final say, we allow ourselves, outside of the bloc of EU member states, to allow pretty undesirable people to take over the debate within Europe as well. And I'm thinking in particular of the rise of the far right, not just in the United Kingdom, but when we would potentially no longer have the ability to have that final say. And it is the theme of the final say on reversing the tragedy that is Brexit. Just as an example, I mean, on my speaker's card, I said I wanted to make the point about LGBT rights, and I think that is quite crucial. But we have to remember the idea behind lines 20 to 23 in particular recognise that many EU nationals do not enjoy the legal rights that we have in the United Kingdom as yet, particularly same-sex marriage. And for us to not recognise that we really do need to claim that final say, even as a preference to members of Parliament having that final say, would be the greatest tragedy since we actually joined what is now the European Union in 1972. So I really would urge you all to back the motion as a whole. We have people like the President of Poland who in January 2017 said that same-sex marriage will never be on the table to the people of Poland, and that it will always be constitutionally defined as one man and one woman. I would urge you to back this motion as a whole, as a priority. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I call Lisa Marie Bournemouth, who wishes to speak against the motion and is a first-time speaker, and ask Laura Gordon to stand by.
Conference. I am the chair of Lib Dem Immigrants, a group that we founded last year to stand up for immigrants' rights both within the party and outside of it. As you can probably tell, I've been told it's quite noticeable by the accent, I'm also an immigrant myself. I'm from Germany and I've been living and working in the UK for over 6.5 years. With both those hats on, as being an immigrant myself and as being someone who wants to stand up for immigrants' rights, I'm reading this motion. Conference notes that EU citizens in the UK remain uncertain about their futures. Yes, we certainly do. Conference believes that the agreement reached on EU citizens' rights does not go far enough to protect existing rights of EU citizens in the UK. Doubtlessly. Conference calls for, wait a moment, there is nothing in there about EU citizens' rights at all anymore. I'm glad to hear from Tom and from others that this is implied, but I don't think this is going far enough. Implying things, giving how little airtime we get, is really not very reassuring at the moment. I've been told that in the local elections we're targeting EU citizens, that they could be a real asset, that they could be really good for getting more councillors in. But by merely implying that we will guarantee citizens' rights, we're not going to win anyone over with this. And this is why I'm in favor of the, thank you. This is why I'm in favor of referring it back and putting something in that makes me, as an EU citizen, as an EU immigrant, proud to say I'm with the Liberal Democrats and we stand up for EU citizens' rights no matter what. No matter if there's another referendum, no matter if there's a vote in Parliament, we stand up for immigrants' rights no matter what. Thank you.
Laura Gordon from Sheffield Hallam, and could I ask Rob Wayway to stand by, please?
Thank you. I'm not going to rehash any of the arguments about Brexit. Most of us agree there. Brexit is a terrible idea and we shouldn't do it. But this isn't what this is about. This is about democracy, but more importantly, I think it's about common sense. Because think about it. If somebody offers you a job and you say, yeah, I think that job sounds all right, verbally accept it, and then they send you a contract and the salary's half what you expected and you're working 14 hours a day in a salt mine, are you going to say, well, I verbally accept it over the phone, so I have to take it anyway? Or are you going to say, actually, now I've seen the details, I'm going to pass on that and stick with what I'm doing now, because this is fine, thanks? Like, I think most of us would go for the second one. This motion is good policy, and it's good strategy, and it's good tactics. It's clear on what we want, an exit from Brexit, and it's also clear on how, which is via democracy. We got into this mess via the will of the people. The only way we can get out of it is via the will of the people. It makes us the only party that is clearly opposing Brexit, and it holds Labour to account. It also is soft enough that it allows Leave voters the option to give themselves permission to vote for us. Even Nigel Farage has come around to us, which I think makes it the second time after the AV referendum that I've ever agreed with Nigel Farage on anything at all. But it's something that enables us to come together in favour of a democratic solution to the problem that we find ourselves in. And I think that's important, because if we're going to get out of this in a constructive place, it has to be in a way that enables us to come together. And I think the only way we'll do that is via democracy. That's why I am concerned about the lines about the parliamentary vote. I think that a parliamentary vote on this would be seen as a stitch-up and it would be seen as undemocratic. Conference, I would urge you to pass the motion as a whole, but I do have concerns about the parliamentary vote option, and I think that's something that we should be avoiding if at all possible. It has to be via democracy, and it has to be via allowing everybody to come together. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Rachel McCann to stand by Rob Wayway from Coventry?
Rob Wayway from Coventry. Conference, the reason the referendum was lost because the campaign was complacent, and this motion here is equally complacent. There's no sign that we acknowledged that we lost, and no sign that we've learnt lessons from that loss. It's insulting to those who voted for Brexit and gives them no reason to change over and vote to stay in the EU. So what do we need to do about it? Well, we need to counter the idea that there's no democracy in the EU. The problem is we don't see the members of the MEPs, and I'm not criticising our party, I'm criticising all MEPs. We don't see them. Nobody knows what's going on. In the popular, they see nothing about that democracy. And it's ridiculous that there is no linkage between our MPs and our MEPs. What we could do with immediately is regular meetings in Parliament between MPs and MEPs, so the issues are raised and people can see that there is democracy within the EU. We need to counter the idea that in the war we stood alone. We did not stand alone. The first battles were won for us by soldiers from the Indian subcontinent. Our friends from all over the world, all over what is now the Commonwealth, piled in to help us. In the Battle of Britain, some of the best pilots were Polish. Obviously, the Americans joined us, and the greatest loss of death was on the Russian front, where 2/3 or 3/4. We won because we did not stand alone. We also need to acknowledge much more publicly and advocate our pivotal role in world affairs. We are, in short, the best connected country in the world. We're in the United Nations, we're in the Commonwealth, we're in the European Union, we're in NATO and many other places. Because we're the best networked country in the world, we punch and can punch well above our weight. We laid down the original rules for many of the biggest international sports organisations. Scouts and Guides, the biggest youth organisation, was started by us. Absolutely crucially, our language has become the international language throughout the world. People are grateful that they only need to learn English and then they can speak throughout the world. We are pivotal because of those networks, and we need to stress them. We are not standing alone. I ask you to reject this motion and reject the complacency.
Can I call Rachel McGann, and then we'll move to the reference back. I've called Rachel, but she doesn't appear to be in the auditorium. Oh, we are, right.
Apologies, conference, I am slightly hard of hearing. I am a dual citizen. I am Irish as well as British, and I want to talk to you about the potential impact on the border between the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland. When I was growing up, I used to live in Scotland, and every year we would travel down from Larne, drive down through Northern Ireland, and then have to cross the border over into the Republic. This used to take quite a lot of time. There used to be other issues at the time as well. For example, petrol prices used to be different sides of the border. The counties on either side of the border used to be known as bandit country. There was smuggling of things like cigarettes and alcohol. Another thing, when I was growing up, we didn't honestly think at the time we would ever see peace in Northern Ireland of any sort. The Good Friday Agreement, when it happened, was nothing short of miraculous in many ways. This is now jeopardised. Nothing worries me more at the moment than what may happen if we return to having a hard border in Ireland. My family live just 10 miles south of that border. At the moment, you can pop into Northern Ireland. The only way you will even know you've changed countries is because the road signs will change from kilometres to miles. That's the only thing. That's the only border there is at the moment. I have not heard from the Tories or from Labour how they actually propose to make a border work. It is Schrodinger's border. It is simultaneously there and not there. The can is continually kicked down the road. I know Theresa May claims that she has got some kind of agreement with the EU about how this border is going to work. But on the one hand, you have the DUP saying they don't want to be in the single market anymore and the customs union. And on the other hand, you have the EU saying that's the only way you're going to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland. And then we have the wonderful Boris Johnson telling us that borders in London between regional authorities are exactly the same. All I can say, please, conference, is support this motion as it is, because it does mention Northern Ireland. I think in many ways it could even mention the border more. I don't know how this question is going to be resolved if we have any kind of Brexit at all. It would have to be the softest of soft Brexits for it to work. I don't think that's what we're heading for at the moment. I wish we weren't heading for Brexit at all. I still hope, and I still urge every single person in this room to campaign in whatever way you can. Talk to people. I talk to people all the time about Brexit. I talk to leavers about Brexit. You need to tell people what the problems are. Conference, I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Conference, I have received a reference back request. I'll now read out the request that's been received. This policy will be ignored by the media and will bore voters. Brexit is the biggest political crisis in many of our lifetimes, and we're being sidelined in a fight that we should be leading because we bore people. We urgently need a distinctive policy which will grab the attention of the media and the electorate. This isn't it. There will now be a vote requiring a simple majority on hearing a mini-debate on the reference back. Could I see those in favour of the mini-debate? And those against? Overwhelmingly lost, thank you. Could I ask Marcus Gearing to come to the rostrum, and then we will move to the summation by Weir Hobhouse.
Thank you very much, Conference. My name is Marcus Gearing. I'm an EU migrant and have been living in Cambridge since 2005. I was elected councillor to represent my local neighbourhood, which is beautiful, and it's called Newnham. Yay. I'm an EU citizen who was elected, and I should declare an interest because I've been teaching EU law for the last 20 years. But since the referendum, and that's why I support this motion, the atmosphere in this country has changed. The feeling that we encounter as EU migrants is hostile to complacent. And I think we need to stand with those people that Tom called the cruelly disenfranchised EU citizens. Because when my kids get asked on the playground whether they really have a right to be in this country, I feel disenfranchised. When I'm seeing my colleagues in the workplace who are now making plans to move back to continental Europe because this country is leaving the European Union, because they're uncertain about their future, I feel disenfranchised with them. I think Brexit changes fundamentally the climate. I'm, for one, up to losing 2/3 of my accrued pension from Germany because Germany reduces the pensions if you live in a third country. And if this country crashes out of the EU with no agreement on either side, lots of personal lives, personal biographies will be affected. So I urge you, Conference, to support this motion strongly. I think it strikes the right balance and it has a catchy phrase. The discussion about Brexit will not end in little over a year from now. Indeed, I fear the real crisis will happen when we all notice how bad it is to be outside the European Union. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Now call upon Weir Hobhouse MP to summate the motion. Thank you.
Well, Conference, we had a full and interesting debate on the Liberal Democrat position for an exit from Brexit, and in true Liberal Democrat form, we had also a number of dissents. I completely share the red-hot anger that everybody has who has spoken today about where we are today and how the Conservatives got us here. My biggest fear is actually the complete incompetence of those who are currently taking the decisions. The government is still stuck on trying to have its cake and eating it, and nearly 2 years after the referendum and 1 year since Article 50, the Irish border question remains unresolved. And our wonderful MEP, Catherine Bearder, compared the Brexit proposals to a fairy tale and has coined this wonderful sentence, "Give us a say, Mrs. May." We also heard a very good demonstration of this fairy tale about the Irish border from Rachel. Absolutely. What is it, this border without a border? Nobody has actually found an answer to that one. We heard in the mini debate that argument that we should broadening the franchise, and actually we have made it very clear that we Liberal Democrats very much are in favor for broadening the franchise to the EU citizens. But I have accepted actually the argument that there are technical reasons why this proposal was as such rejected. But we have made it very clear that we would include EU citizens in the new franchise if we got a referendum on the deal. My fellow immigrant Ruth from Germany want to hear more about EU citizens' rights, which is why she wasn't so happy with the motion as a whole. But again, we have to point out that we are fully on board with the rights of the 3 million, and I'm one of the many who was campaigning with the 3 million in Bath. We heard from Torin some arguments about different models, like the EFTA countries, and how these models are preferable now to a referendum. Again, I have to say, our position is very clear and very distinctive. We need a referendum on the deal, because whatever models there are, they aren't as good as what we already have. And I would say this is a very distinctive position, and I do not think the press will be bored by a distinctive position. No other party actually has that position. A couple of weeks ago, Labour set out their new position on Brexit, and a week ago, as we know, the Prime Minister reiterated her fairy tale. Can anyone actually tell me which version the people voted for in 2016? Of course not, because the facts have changed. But the government and the Labour Party are stuck in 2016. They say they are following the will of the people, but nobody bothers to find out what the will of the people actually is now. Indeed, the last who are going to be asked are the people themselves, and I think Laura, our wonderful new PPC for Sheffield Hallam, has pointed that actually out. It is about democracy. Britain is a parliamentary democracy, but now we've had a referendum. There is no obvious mechanism for updating, confirming, or reviewing the referendum result. The general election in 2017 did not provide a new mandate on Brexit. It is obvious that 650 MPs cannot update, confirm, or review the decision taken by 33 million people. But the people can. Parliament is following, it is not leading. We Liberal Democrats must lead. An exit from Brexit will come from the bottom up. It will come from us, the 100,000 Liberal Democrat members joining with millions of others to tell government that their Brexit is not in the name of the people. Just before Christmas, Parliament voted to give itself a vote on the deal, and that was a welcome step forward, but I share Laura's concern. What was started with the people must end with the people. The people must sign off or reject the deal. Only the people can finish what the people have started. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you. We will now move to a vote to approve the policy motion F5 on pages 40 and 41. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Those against? Overwhelmingly carried. Thank you very much indeed, Conference. Could I say that we called 9 speakers? There were 17 that we were unable to call because of the number of cards that were submitted. Could I remind colleagues that there is an emergency motion ballot, and can I urge you to participate in that? Can I thank my aide, Zoe O'Connell, and my hall aide, Cara Jenkinson. And I now hand over to Jenny Lang for the next item, F6.
Oh.
Good morning, conference. If you are leaving the hall, if you could do so quietly, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. It now gives me enormous pleasure to introduce our next speaker. He is one of our most passionate campaigners. He won his seat originally in '97 and won it back again in 2017. He's also one of our most formidable parliamentarians. He's a former Secretary of State for Energy, and currently he is our Home Affairs spokesperson. So I'd like to introduce the Right Honourable Sir Ed Davey.
Conference, my aim today is to boost your local campaigning, to give you a message for your local voters, a reason to vote Liberal Democrat wherever you live. And it's about the police. We need a strong Lib Dem campaign against Conservative police cuts. Indeed, campaigning against many aspects of how the Conservatives are treating our policemen and women, with frozen salaries, pension cuts, and shockingly, Prime Minister-led anti-police attacks. In less than 2 months, there are important council elections. Elections that may bring big changes for local communities. Elections that might even see a change in the Prime Minister. But who might come next? Prime Minister Johnson? If the Conservative Party really love our Queen, surely they must spare her from Boris. Or it might be the MP for the 19th century, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Wouldn't that be tip-top for us? Colleagues, whichever joker it is, our responsibility in British politics has never been greater. With Brexit Conservatives and Corbyn Labour, the country is crying out for an alternative voice. Liberal Democrats, we can be that alternative, but we've got to build on our recent council by-election victories. May's local elections provide a great chance to do just that. Core to winning again, though, is the task of explaining our Liberal message in new ways that resonate with more voters. Our position on Brexit resonates, but you'd be shocked to know that only 25% of voters know our position. Our position on honest funding for the NHS, that resonates too. But how many voters in your area really know that Liberal Democrats are arguing for a penny on income tax for the NHS? With the media squeezing us out nationally, the great opportunity of local elections is to make sure people do know what we stand for, in leaflets, on social media, with local press. Now, inevitably, in local elections, there are a wide variety of locally based issues that won't relate to these national messages. In Kingston-upon-Thames, for example, we're fighting to save the council from bankruptcy. Kingston's Conservatives have been almost as financially incompetent as the bankrupt Northamptonshire Tories. In Kingston-upon-Hull, Liberal Democrats are fighting to stop Labour's cuts to local health services, including services to new mothers and vulnerable groups. Yet as I travel round the country, talking to local campaigners, one issue keeps coming up time and time again, and it's the police cuts, and rises in crime. Serious crimes, like knife crime, gun crime, violent crime, and burglaries. Now, already many Lib Dem campaigners are onto this, are focused on it. ALDC and the campaigns department have produced campaign packs on crime to help you make the case for more police in your area. But today, I'm not going to focus so much on the Bobbies on the beat question. Instead, I want to make the philosophical case for more police, the values and ethical case for Liberals backing the police. Because I believe the case for investing more in our police goes beyond the important objective of cutting crime. For I think we and the British people value our police for much more than that. We look to our police to step in when something goes wrong, when bad weather causes some emergency, when a community healthcare worker can't cope with someone's acute mental health episode. At any crisis, big or small, people turn to the police. Think of that brave police officer poisoned in Salisbury when going to help people clearly in trouble. And PC Keith Palmer, who gave his life protecting Parliament almost a year ago. I've had the privilege of attending local police awards ceremonies in Kingston, of commendations and bravery awards of amazing police officers in my patch. When you hear their stories of what these men and women have done, it really moves you. Conference, police officer bravery happens every day. But like the Liberal Democrats, it just doesn't get reported. And yet we have a Conservative Prime Minister who bashed our police more than any modern-day Home Secretary. So let us tell the real story of the British police. Let Liberal Democrats be the party of the police. Now, some of you by now are probably thinking, what the hell is Ed talking about? The party of the police? Surely a Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesman should be talking about civil liberties, human rights, holding the police to account. Well, of course, I do. We are the party of civil liberties and always will be. And I recognise that the police aren't perfect. Don't pretend to be perfect. They're citizens in uniform, after all. And someone will always need to guard the guardians. But let's remember this boring, basic fact that without a strong police force, how can you protect civil liberties? Our freedoms as individuals and communities requires the police. Freedom to walk the streets without fear. Freedom to know you won't be burgled in your home by violent robbers, as 2 British Asian families in my constituency were last month. Freedom for our young people, disproportionately the victims of crime. Freedom so they can enjoy their lives. Yet what I see in Britain today is Conservative police cuts undermining people's freedom. And Liberal Democrats, we must expose that. But the case for Liberals championing the police goes beyond this well-known freedom case. The Liberal case for more police is also about social justice, about protecting the most vulnerable, about creating the safe communities we all want to live in. I first realised the police were vital for social justice back in 1989 when I joined the party. I'm an oldie. And the light bulb moment occurred when I was canvassing in my first ever parliamentary by-election in Vauxhall for our excellent candidate, a certain Mike Tuffrey. I'd spent a Saturday morning canvassing tower blocks on a council estate in Battersea. And I was confused. Almost every person I spoke to came to the door with a dog, mostly a large dog, holding the dog's collar as they held the door just slightly ajar. And as a privileged middle-class white young man, I wondered to myself, why keep a big dog in a small flat, 10 floors up in a tower block? Was there some sort of dog owners club on the estate? Was there a local passion for entering Crufts, the world's greatest dog show? It was only in the pub afterwards when fellow canvassers explained the dogs were there for protection, as a type of insurance, given people couldn't afford a real contents insurance. And my work in my constituency, in the pockets of genuine deprivation that we have in Kingston, has only served to reinforce this view, that it is the most vulnerable and least well off in our society who need the police the most. Perhaps some of you still aren't convinced, but I think modern British political debate has failed to see the police as champions of social justice, as I believe they inherently are. In the past, those on the centre-left of politics have either been critics of the police with, say, a Corbyn-style police oppression analysis, or the centre-left has tried Blair-like to ape and to copy the right's rhetoric on crime and police. So I think there's a gap, a political opportunity that fits our values, that would help Liberal Democrats to explain our values and who we are in a new way to more people. In our leaflets, in our campaigns, yes, let's keep it basic. It's about stopping the Conservatives' cuts to our police and arguing for more bobbies on the beat. But the underlying philosophy, the liberal values we bring to that simple message, we need to state them with greater clarity and greater confidence. Just look at the statistics of who are the victims of crime. You are more likely to be a victim of crime if you are disabled, more likely to be a victim of crime if you are poor, if you are long-term unemployed, if you are black, of mixed race, or Asian, or a young person. So if we want to reach out to the young, to Britain's diverse communities, and be the voice of the most vulnerable, then a message that Liberal Democrats will invest in the police is a strong one. Now, some of our opponents, of course, will choose to misinterpret this. There are less well-off communities who have a mixed relationship with the police, who don't see the police as on their side, who see people backing the police as also not on their side. But the answer to the fears and concerns of those communities is to improve community policing, with more resources, not less, and with better techniques, and with new approaches to recruiting a more diverse police service. Let's be honest, if the police are stretched, then the first thing to go is the proactive, community, relationship-building element of their work. Inevitably, the reactive work, the response teams, the detection of the most serious crimes, the anti-terrorism work, those vital areas will rightly be prioritised by police managers when budgets are tight, but at a huge cost to community policing. In London, for example, mainly thanks to Mayor Johnson, we've seen our neighbourhood police teams halved. And that means the positive contribution the police makes end up being sacrificed. I was reminded of this morning of an old gag by Eric Morecambe when he heard the siren of a passing ambulance. And he said, "He'll not sell much ice cream going at that speed." The same is true of the police. If police cuts constrain them to dashing around in cars with blue lights as they firefight, they won't sell any ice cream. They won't have the time to get to know people, for people to get to know them, for people to realise that the police are just you and me in a uniform, albeit professionals with a lot of training and equipment. People go into the police to serve. It's no longer the Metropolitan Police Force, it's the Metropolitan Police Service. And while renaming something doesn't itself change it, I think the police have changed in recent years, mainly for the better. Community safety partnerships, action on honour-based violence, work to tackle crime gangs, and so much more. And colleagues, it's that crime prevention work, that brilliant community policing, that's the police work that turns round lives, that stops crime happening to our most vulnerable. Yet it's that work that Conservative police cuts are destroying. Shame on them. But people should no longer be surprised at how anti-police the Conservatives are. As Home Secretary, the Prime Minister herself indulged in police-bashing rhetoric to serve her own political ambitions. In 2015, she accused police officers of crying wolf over cuts, of scaremongering, and she tried to justify it by pointing to falling crime figures. Well, she's now been proven wrong on 3 accounts. First, the police were just doing their job. The cuts are doing damage. The police were telling the truth. Just as the new commissioner of the Met Police, Cressida Dick, was telling the truth, when just 4 months ago, she warned that police cuts in Conservative budget plans would make it difficult to tackle violent crime and extremism. Prime Minister, was Cressida Dick scaremongering? Second way she was caught out was when Theresa May said crime was going down. Recorded crime is now rising. Burglary up 8%, knife crime up 21%, gun crime up 20%. After a period of falling crime, it looks like the trend has changed. but Tory policy hasn't. And third, the police officers the Prime Minister accused of crying wolf weren't just warning of the impact of police cuts on crime, they were warning that they were worried about the impact of Conservative cuts on community and neighbourhood policing. The truth is, Conservative governments have form on police cuts. They have been guilty, time and time again, of cutting police budgets. You know why I think Tories do that? It's because they simply don't value enough the role of police in our communities. The police's role in defending the most vulnerable, in protecting those who suffer the most, the least well off. After all, the Conservative paymasters live in gated communities with sophisticated cameras and alarms and have the best contents insurance available. So Liberal Democrats, we shouldn't just see the police's role as responding to crime and cutting crime, vital and key though that is. We need the police to make the positive contribution only they can make to help us build a more liberal and socially just Britain. It's called policing by consent. That's why we were right at the last election to be the party offering more investment in Britain's police than any other party. That's why we are right now in councils and communities up and down the country to fight for more police. And I believe we will be right now to tell the British public loud and clear, if you want to back our police, back the Liberal Democrats. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed. I think you've given us a huge amount to go away and campaign on. I want to thank my aide, Victor Chamberlain, and I now hand the chair over to Liz Lynn for the next debate.
Good morning. We're just about to start the education debate, so if you could move out as quickly as possible, thank you. Right, we're now moving to F7, the education motion. Sorry, if everyone can move out as quickly as possible, thank you. F7, the education motion, which can be found on page 42 of the agenda. There are 4 amendments, and these can be found on page 12 to 13 of Conference Daily. We've also, as FCC, accepted some drafting amendments, and those can also be found on pages 12 and 13. Most of you know there will be 1-minute interventions, and so if anyone wants to make an intervention from the intervention mic here over to the right of the auditorium, please put in an intervention card at the speaker's desk, and then you can speak for 1 minute within the debate. Can I now ask, I forgot to say that we haven't got anybody who's put in a card to propose Amendment 4, So anybody who, Janet Groberg is down to propose Amendment 4, so can she please put in a card? Can I ask Gideon Amos to stand by? And it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our education spokesperson in the Commons, Leila Moran MP.
Hello, Conference. It is with immense pride, and I'll admit a bit of giddy delight, that I stand to move this motion today, my first as an MP and as our party spokesperson on education. Thank you. Every child empowered, education for a changing world represents a bold new direction for our party, and it is the first step in the Liberal Democrats reclaiming what in my eyes is our rightful place as the party of education. Now, the last time the conference saw such a wide-ranging motion on education was nearly a decade ago at our Bournemouth conference of 2008. I remember because it was my second ever conference. And at that motion, I gave my first ever conference speech against the motion. Now, don't get me wrong. It was a great motion and was the introduction of one of the policies that I'm most proud of, the pupil premium. But the reason I spoke against it is that I didn't believe at the time, a mid-career physics teacher that I was, fresh off the back of my master's in comparative education, that we went far enough. That paper passed overwhelmingly, and I was happy to see it do so, but I remember thinking, as David Laws was summing up, you know what, I'd love that job. Well, sometimes dreams do come true. For so long, Britain has been a country devoid of vision in education. In the creation of this paper, we wanted to challenge the very premise of why we educate. What is the purpose of education today? What are we doing it for, and to what end? And at its very heart is a simple question. How does this benefit the child? We face, in my opinion, two existential crises that are even more concerning than a funding crisis. The first is mental health and well-being. Year after year, we are increasingly aware that children are more and more unhappy. The root cause is not necessarily school, but I do believe that the high-stakes, grade-driven system that we now have does contribute. Well-being should be at the heart of what schools do. Parents, in fact, do this instinctively, don't they? Is my child going to be happy here is the top question most ask when choosing a school. But this current system seems to only care about reducing children to a number. What we are saying, Conference, is that schools should be so much more than just about grades. The other crisis is reflected in the changing world part of the title. Conference, the robots are coming. They are coming to take our jobs, and there ain't no immigration system that can keep them out, because that's called progress. And as a progressive party, we embrace it. But we must be prepared for it. What we have now is a system that basically churns out second-rate robots. Their brains are hard drives to be filled with files and unsophisticated algorithms. It values learning by rote more than encouraging critical reasoning. And it stifles the very traits that robots find hardest to replicate: creativity, empathy, the ability to work in a team, and to think laterally. To be the masters and not the slaves of AI, we must double down on what it means to be human and stop setting children up to fail. Instead, we should teach them how to succeed in every circumstance. We are failing to harness the uniqueness in every child. Instead, we should be encouraging diversity of thought, which in turn will lead to innovation, higher productivity, and enduring resilience. Well, how do we propose to do that? First, we need to fund schools properly. The government seems to be willfully blind to the frontline consequences of their spending cuts. rising class sizes, fewer teaching assistants, teachers who are stretched beyond their capability. I understand Damien Hines today is talking about teacher workloads. Too little, too late. In the end, it is only the children who suffer. Liberal Democrats will protect per pupil funding in real terms, and we would also build on the pupil premium, recognising that money put in at the beginning of a child's journey is money well spent, and treble the early years pupil premium to £1,000. But money isn't everything. Conference, I want to tell you something. Having now done both jobs, I can say from experience that being a great teacher is harder than being an MP. Teachers are the glue that binds the system together. Teachers, we value you, which is why not only do we fight for the pay cap to be lifted, but we also want to support and expand the Chartered College of ensure professional development is a priority and require all teachers to have qualified teacher status. Teaching is a vocation. It is an art and a science, and it's time we recognise that properly. It is time to bring back the joy in teaching. But what is the point of having great teachers if they're hamstrung to an outdated straitjacket of a curriculum? A curriculum should provide every opportunity for a child to succeed. Currently, our system outlines a to success, and anything outside of that is failure. The curriculum should value different style of thinking and different ways of expressing ideas. Creative subjects and the humanities are critical to our understanding of ourselves and our place in the world, which is why they must be given a level playing field with STEM. And, this is radical, it should be written by experts using evidence and not be tinkered with by politicians based on what they think feels right. Can you imagine if we did that in the NHS? Our new proposed curriculum would be all of these things, and it would also teach students about life. We would have financial literacy, first aid, and compulsory relationship and sex education, alongside those classical subjects. Our vision is that when students leave school, they will be ready for the world, no matter what it may throw at them. On assessment and exams, well, a wise man, Tim Farron, once said, "It doesn't matter how often you weigh the pig, it won't make it any fatter." I couldn't agree more. The high-stakes testing we subject our children to is killing their love of learning. So we will abolish Key Stage 1 and 2 SATs and replace... I thought you'd like that. And replace them with lighter touch, teacher-moderated assessment. So no, we're not getting rid of all tests, even if we are after the youth vote. But we are moving to a system that tests because it's the right thing for the student and where we trust our teachers. We'd also get rid of pervasive league tables. You can't reduce children and learning to a number. So why do we compare schools that way? We'd reform the data available on government websites to place qualitative judgments alongside those numbers, to give parents a full and realistic idea of what a school's actually like. And finally, while I'm in an abolishing mood, Ofsted. Ofsted is broken, and in our view, is beyond reform. What we do believe is that there needs to be a school accountability system, but it should be done in partnership with schools and measure so much more than it does now, reflecting the fact that schools are more than just numbers too. We would replace Ofsted entirely with a Her Majesty's Inspector for Schools, and it would place educational leadership and the well-being of students and staff on a par with progress and attainment. Now, conference, I'm running out of time, and I'm very eager to hear this debate, especially those who want to speak against, as I did all those years ago. But there is so much more to this paper than I've just described, and I would encourage you to read it in full. I also don't consider it a finished product, and I expect we'll be back here again, refining it as time goes on. But I do hope you'll recognize that this is a new practical, and above all, liberal direction for our party and our country. Liberal because it truly puts the needs of the individual, the learner, the child, first, and makes the point that if you nurture those individuals and if you value their differences and you ensure that they are never enslaved by ignorance or conformity, that our communities and our society at large will only benefit as a result. I urge you to pass the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leila. And I ask Claire Campion-Smith to stand by, and I now call Gideon Amos from Taunton Deane to propose Amendment 1.
Conference, thank you, and what a fantastic privilege it is to follow such an excellent education spokesperson. And I'm sure you'll agree we have fantastic individuality. And we have a really great policy paper, which I think is fantastic in almost every respect. It is actually something I want to go out and campaign on a little more, as I was yesterday in the River Liscombe Council by-election, putting up the second state board. I got the finger injury to prove it. But every school, in fact, in Taunton Deane, bar one, has had its budget cut by this Conservative government. And this arbitrary cap on the workers' pay of everyone in the education system has been bearing down on education for far too long. It's totally unfair, and it's completely right that our policy priority puts funding education front and centre. But I want to talk to you about children who are the most vulnerable in our communities. I'm as impatient as anyone that standards in home education are ensured just as they are in schools across the country. I want to see the network of home education organisations, which are now in every part of the UK, used to their fullest. I want to see the teachers, the scientists, the artists and the professionals that run those organisations involved in that drive to improve home education as well as education in schools. And it is a sadness that none of those experts were consulted on the late inclusion of policy on home education in our policy paper, and this is a sadness indeed that members were not consulted either on the late inclusion of the points about home education. The evidence is, ladies and gentlemen, that the rates of children at risk in safeguarding terms is higher amongst children in school than it is in the home education community. So in that regard, of course, most kids would have no problem at all with officers of the local education authority coming to their home and inspecting what they're doing and what their family is doing in regards to education. But the title, I said most, the title of our policy is Every Child Matters. And that means that the most disadvantaged and the most vulnerable children need to be thought of as well. And there are some children who have been bullied severely. There are some children who have mental health conditions for whom officers of the LEA knocking on the door, requiring entry into potentially every home in the land twice per year will be an incredibly stressful and disruptive experience to their education. And there's no need for it because there are alternatives. Meeting can be held. A local education authority can express their concerns formally. Responses can be made, or meetings can be held outside the home. This is a rather arbitrary approach. This is a minor amendment, ladies and gentlemen. It keeps visits to home educating families in the policy. It keeps safeguards, and it keeps checks and balances. But by diverting resources from the attention to those children that really need it, and dissipating it to inspections twice a year into every home educating home in the country is not only incredibly expensive, perhaps £250,000 per local education authority, it's also diverting resources, as I say, from the children who need it. So let's not make ourselves have the most authoritarian policy of any party on home education. Let's not antagonise and alienate a community that have come to the Liberal Democrats largely because they believed that we believed in educational freedom, and many of whom have been disillusioned by the authoritarian approach of the Labour Party. Let's accept this amendment. Let's improve our policy. This is a fantastic policy otherwise. Let's scrap the cap, get rid of over-testing, value teaching over tables, value education in every setting, and let me go back to Taunton Deane and the Witheliston by-election, put up more state boards. I've still got 9 fingers undamaged. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. And can I ask Jess Insull to stand by? And I now call Councillor Claire Champion-Smith to propose Amendment 2.
Conference. Amendment 2 relates to Section 5 of the motion and to Section 6 of the policy document, and it is about school structures. And I want to argue for the role of the local authority, for the role to be able to bring coherence to what is a very fragmented situation at the moment, to bring the strengths and opportunities of the local area into education, and to support all schools in their development. And also to restore democratic accountability. Now, I believe that there should be a much more level playing field between local authorities and between MATs. The old government mantra of local authorities bad, MATs good, no longer applies. There is no evidence to support that. And therefore, if it is right for the children, the parents and the teachers of local authorities that they should in fact be, local authorities should be inspected, then why are we disadvantaging children, parents and teachers of MATs? MATs also need to be inspected. And I would also urge on conference a pragmatic policy that, in fact, local authorities should be able to open community schools. When we have this mixed landscape of different sorts of schools, then it's appropriate that we should choose the best person to run a new school. Local authorities must be allowed to open community schools. So that is the basis of the amendment which we are bringing forward. And just to give you a wee bit of background to it, over the last 10 years, there have been enormous changes in education. We've got free schools, trust schools, standalone academies, academies within local chains, academies within national chains, and so it goes on, and locally maintained schools. And we've had regional schools commissioners. Now, with all these different types of schools, we have different areas of responsibility, we have different levels of accountability, and different links as well. And some of those links of accountability are indeed very, very weak. And we recognise that at its very, very best, diversity has brought advantage. It has created new thinking. It has brought in organisations with a real commitment and a genuine commitment to education, and it's also helped parent preference. But at the same time, the fragmentation has too many gaps, and we know that the children who have always fallen between gaps, in fact, some children make a career out of falling between gaps, and so for those children at risk of exclusion with special educational needs, and with in-year admissions, we believe that the local authorities must pick up that role and have the responsibility and the funding in order to be able to do it. Time goes very quickly, but one of the things which I do feel that I want to emphasise at the very end is that this is not a power grab by local authorities. It is not a nostalgic trip into the past. It is about pragmatic policies, and it is very much about exploring the strengths of the local community, and it's about the democratic accountability that brings education back to the community.
Can you draw your remarks to a close?
Please support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. If Janet Groberg is here, please, can I ask her to stand by? If not, Ian Embry is the speaker after that, and I now call Jess Insall from Sterling and Clackmannanshire to propose Amendment 3.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Conference. I am bursting for positive change. As a feminist, as an LGBTQ+ rights activist, and as a Liberal Democrat. And we are making so many positive changes, but our schools are being caught short. There is one problem that causes so much harm, but is so simple to fix: uniforms. I am angry that girls are often forced to wear sexualized and impractical uniforms from ages as young as 4 years old. 4 years old. The minute a girl walks into primary school, she is shown that boys have more freedom to run about. She is taught to take inequality for granted and to accept it as the norm. We can change that. Instead of making all boys wear trousers and all girls wear skirts, schools should simply be letting all pupils choose between trousers and skirts. We need to stop telling our sisters and daughters to put their education after the way they look, and we need to fight for their physical and mental health. As a feminist, I believe that is exactly what this amendment could do. As an LGBTQ+ rights activist, I am outraged because all people should have the right to feel valued and included at school. But if we don't let them wear an appropriate uniform or even acknowledge their sheer existence, this is just not a viable reality for some pupils. We need to flush this blatant discrimination out of our school systems. By making uniforms gender neutral, we give pupils the freedom to decide how to dress appropriately to their personal identity, without limiting schools' freedom to decide what pupils can or can't wear. This means transgender and non-binary pupils can dress appropriately for their gender, even if they're not in a safe or comfortable place to come out formally to their school. I joined this wonderful party only last June. I joined because of our values of openness, tolerance, and acceptance. These were the very values that pushed me to put forward this amendment. Judging our young people on more than just their gender teaches them to be more open and accepting to those who are different. It teaches them to be tolerant to their classmates, but also to their teachers, neighbors, friends, and family. This amendment will also support and enhance our existing policy on mental health, gender equality, improving education, and even freedom of movement. We need to give girls the freedom to move both of their legs as independent limbs. And I hear you ask, how could anyone oppose that? The beloved Daily Mail warns us that allowing boys to wear skirts for reasons of political correctness could be unsettling and confusing to some children. They've obviously never been to Scotland. But our so-called equality is useful for more than just pissing off the right-wing press. When pupils feel comfortable and welcome at school, it boosts self-esteem and body positivity, meaning pupils will be happier. And young people that enjoy education will engage more and perform better academically. Of course, a lot of my discontent does come from personal experiences. From a young age, I have been jealous of my male friends' ability to walk on a windy day without the colour of their undies entering the public domain. I have been jealous of their ability to run and to climb, and I have always been conscious that there was a certain demeanour expected of me that was never expected of them. But we've all had experiences like that. Whether we're told to man up or to act more ladylike, the problem is fundamentally the same. When we tell people to act a certain way because of their gender, it spawns hatred, jealousy, and division. So, conference, let's take this opportunity to diminish this division. Let's give all pupils of all genders fairer school uniforms. I urge you, as a feminist, as an LGBTQ+ rights activist, and as a Liberal Democrat, to vote in favour of this amendment. Thank you, conference.
Thank you. I now ask Janet Groberg if she's here to propose Amendment 4, and I ask Ian Embry to stand by, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very, very pleased to be here and very pleased to be moving this amendment, which replaces lines 29 to 30 in the motion with the following statement. Work towards parity of per pupil funding between post-16 and 5 to 16 funding, and commit to at least protect per pupil funding in real terms from 5 to 19. In some senses, this is a relatively technical amendment because it brings the motion into line with the statements in section 8 of the policy paper. But it also highlights an important commitment for our party: parity of funding for post-16 education. Put simply, the government currently funds every pupil up to the age of 16 at a rate of £4,800 per pupil. Post-16, it's only £4,000. So school sixth form colleges or further education colleges all receive less money per pupil just when young people are going to smaller classes to take their A-levels or are in need of more expensive equipment for vocational courses. It's worth noting this is the reverse of what happens in other OECD countries, where the rate of funding and the number of hours of tuition often goes up at this stage. The impact of this is serious restriction on the offer being made to today's young people. A survey completed last year suggested that 50% of schools and colleges had dropped courses in modern foreign languages. 34% had cut courses in STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and maths. And 67% had reduced student support, such as mental health, employability skills and careers advice. This is the impact of this policy. The squeeze on funding is particularly challenging for further education colleges, also hit by cuts to adult education. We know these colleges are in close touch with local employers and are at the heart of local thriving communities. Our leader, Vince Cable, has spoken passionately about his family benefited from access to college study and of their contribution to the skills that we need as a country in the future. Underfunding of post-16 education is short-sighted for our economy, short-sighted for the young people who need courses in which they can flourish. As Liberal Democrats, we should support the policy of parity for post-16 funding, and I urge you to support the amendment and the motion as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Ian Embry, who's a first-time speaker, and I ask Steph Lorenz to please stand by.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Lucy and Layla and all the people who volunteered their time to contribute to this excellent policy paper. I also wish to call attention to the vital and somewhat overlooked contribution that enrichment and extracurricular activities make within a child's education. Education worked really well for me. It worked well for me and for many people in this room, but as a comprehensive school teacher, I know too well that it does not work for everyone. Education is our best chance, arguably our only chance, to actually ensure that everybody has the opportunity to lead a healthy and fulfilling life. What determines an individual's health, their well-being, their later outcomes? It's a very, very complicated question. I'm going to tell you a simple version of what my current thinking is. The course of our lives is determined by the decisions that we make. We either consider those decisions by reflecting on their potential future consequences, or we do whatever we feel like right now. So, for example, I could do my work in class and sit down and listen to the teacher, or I could have a chat with my mates because schoolwork is effort. The first requires me to think about and understand what will happen in the future. the consequences. I could go out for a run in the rain and the cold, or I could just sit on the couch because I'm comfy and warm right now. The same goes for getting involved in tobacco and in other drugs, and in many, many other aspects of life. The same skills, the same decision-making. Please understand, I am not saying that poverty and morbidity are the just desserts of poor decision-making. I am saying the opposite. It is easy for me to not get involved in negative behaviours because my friends weren't doing so. It's easy for me to work hard in school because my friends were doing so. People who don't have those advantages seriously need to develop self-confidence, resilience, determination, and ability to think forwards. And the question we ask ourselves is, where do they get those skills? How do they develop those skills? My answer is that enrichment activities and extracurricular opportunities are the best way that I can learn to pick myself up when something goes badly and try harder. In sports, in music, and the arts, where I believe and am passionate about what I'm doing, it drives me to work hard and practice for future outcomes. I think we need to think about those skills, and I urge those who are making our policy in the area to think about that very, very carefully in what we're putting forwards towards not Ofsted regulations, etc.
Thank you. And I ask David Westons to stand by, and I call Steph Lorenz from Salford to speak for the motion as a whole.
Good morning, Conference. This is my first time speaking, and it's something that I feel very strongly about. For 30 years, I worked with schools and local authorities to give children with disabilities the chance to have access to the same educational opportunities as their non-disabled peers. Through the training of teachers and teaching assistants and the development of support services, we have facilitated the development of truly inclusive schools across the country. In one authority where I worked, we saw an increase from 5 to 85% of children with Down syndrome attending their local school. The gains were astounding. These children not only learnt to read and use computers, but they gained GCSE results and went on to further education. Even more significantly, they made friends in their locality. They were no longer the Hmong that goes off in a bus to somewhere unknown. But the children aren't the only ones to benefit. One head teacher who did everything in his power to avoid taking in a child with Down syndrome, and who was overruled, fortunately, by the local authority, told me some years later, accepting Jonathan and adapting our approaches to meet his needs was the best thing we have ever done. It has benefited all our children. All schools should be made to take a child with Down syndrome. Yet now all that progress is being undermined by Tory austerity. Support services have been disbanded, training budgets have been decimated, and hundreds of teaching assistants have been dismissed or used to cover for teacher shortages. As a consequence, placements are breaking down, and children are being moved back into special schools with lower expectations and poorer outcomes. In some places, these schools are now so oversubscribed that children are left at home with no education at all. As Liberals, we should be doing everything we can to promote inclusive education as a key component of an open, tolerant society. I will ask you, please, to support this motion.
Thank you. Can I ask Emily Smith to stand by, and I call David Weston from Watford, who's against Amendment number 1.
Conference, I joined the Liberal Democrats in 2015 because I knew that the Liberal Democrat education policy that I'd seen under the coalition inspired me. I'm a former teacher, I've worked advising government, I've campaigned campaigned for LGBT rights, and I've led an education charity. Most recently, I've been Vice Chair of the Education Policy Working Group, and I'm really proud of the exciting policies that we can put forward today. We heard from many parents who choose to home educate their children at home. They are incredibly dedicated people who found that the education system, as it's currently working, didn't fit their child. They exercised their absolute right and proper choice to provide their own homeschooling. As Lib Dems, it's our job to support and empower them as everyone else and give their children the quality education that they deserve. Too many home educators that we spoke to, they struggle to access support from our system. They struggled to access support for children with special needs. They struggled to access schools to get their children entered for exams. They struggled to access the specialist curriculum resources to give their children the broad and balanced education that they wanted to. Conference, I will admit, I regret the way that we drafted some of the language in this motion, which inadvertently gave the impression that we don't support home educators, and I want to absolutely affirm to you exactly the opposite is true. We hugely admire the work of home educators. I believe the proportionate and balanced proposals in our paper offer an opportunity to fix this broken system, giving local authorities resources and responsibility to visit home educators, to provide support to home educators, and most importantly, to empower them to access those bits of the system that are currently not available to them. The amendment is very well-meaning, and I completely understand where it comes from, but I believe it severely weakens our intended change. With less contact comes more opportunity for authorities and systems to simply dismiss and ignore home educators. We can't have that box-ticking dismissal. We need to give faceless and, until now, an unsupportive system a human face, proper accountability on them to support and empower home educators. Please don't water down our efforts to empower all families and all children, including those home educators. We must be radical, we must be bold, and I urge you to reject Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, can I ask these people to go to the intervention mic? In 2 speakers' time, we'll be going to interventions. We only have 4 interventions at the moment. Can Lee Darg stand by, David Graham, Brian Herrera Tret, and Kelly Marie Blundell. And now I ask John Carlisle to stand by, and I call Emily Smith for the motion.
Thank you. I'm speaking in support of the motion, and especially section 4.3 of the policy paper, which reconfirms our party's commitment to provide a statutory youth service. When the Conservative government talk about ring-fencing education funding, what they actually mean is school funding. Investment in our schools and teaching staff is vital, but our education policy must continue to encompass all forms of education, from early years to properly funded post-16 provision. I'm pleased this policy paper talks about creating parity between schools and colleges, vocational and academic pathways, and putting the child at the centre. Education is clearly about gaining knowledge, qualifications, numeracy and literacy skills, but it is also about building resilience, problem solving and other transferable skills that will help young people cope with whatever adult life throws at them. Properly funded schools and colleges can provide a lot of this, but not in isolation. My professional background is in children's services, mostly focused on teenagers for whom the education system is not working or who find themselves neat or unemployed at 16. There's a plethora of research showing that youth services and youth workers can have a beneficial impact on on young people's well-being and educational outcomes. There are proven links between taking part in positive activities and maintaining education and employment. We know a key factor for young people's well-being is the opportunity to build relationships with a trusted adult outside of school. We know that careers guidance helps attainment. The list goes on. Yet as local authority budgets shrink, councillors naturally look around for non-statutory services that they can cut. Councils do not have a statutory duty to provide youth services, so this area has little protection. In Oxfordshire, our youth service was closed 7 years ago. Voluntary sector groups are filling some of the gaps, but much of their training and funding came via local authorities, so they are also struggling to survive. The negative impact on this of education is twofold. On one hand, young people have reduced access to positive activities and informal education provided in the community. And on the other hand, the workload of teachers has increased. One head teacher in my division explained how she's spending more and more time liaising with social services, providing parenting advice, supporting young people with mental health problems, because the services and the professionals that used to help her with this are no longer funded. The Liberal Democrats must continue to fight for youth services to be put on a statutory footing, ensuring that youth work gets the funding it needs and is recognised and valued, both as a direct provider of education and as a key partner working closely with schools and colleges to support all young people to succeed. Please support the motion and therefore the policy paper section on out-of-school activities. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have more people for the interventions, which will happen after the next speech, and I'll announce those in their order after the next speech. So it's John Carlisle to speak against lines 40, 31, 77 and 80 from York. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my second ever conference, my first ever speech, and I'm speaking against the motion. So if that sounds familiar, then I'll apologise. Initially, I was very enthusiastic about this policy. Actually, I was riling up the paper and speaking to teachers, governors, parents, going, look how brilliant, ooh, goody, goody, how this motion is. But, oh dear, they weren't quite as enthusiastic as I. They were outraged, firstly, by the fact that we were wasting money on free school meals for parents, for every child, specifically every child. And the reason is because it stops parents who could quite easily afford the meals contributing to something that they probably rightfully should. And we also need to, I'd say, be targeting students who need our help the most, which is where the pupil premium idea comes from. But why aren't we extending it to those who really need it? We've talked a lot about disability, but why is there nothing in this paper on funding disabilities when children who have special requirements are parents, and schools who are made to fund, they're made to fund all of the needs out of their own pockets, i.e. the schools are having to put money in by themselves. And I don't think that's particularly fair. I think we and the government should be funding that rather than the schools. In some areas, we do have the right idea. One of my favourite poets, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, once said, advice is like snow, that the softer it falls, the longer it dwells upon the mind, and the deeper in sinks into the mind. And in this breath, we're right to abolish the SATs. And it isn't right that children of 11 years old are put under such tremendous stress, but please, we do need clarity as to what this light touch testing is. Finally, I'd just like to comment on the idea that qualitative data is better than quantitative data, as suggested. It's true in some ways that it's useful for teachers to discuss the needs and behaviours of pupils, but they already do this. And I really don't see how a mass collection of data is going to be useful or practical. And ultimately, to me, it seems pointless to try and collect qualitative data on this scale. And if you don't want to listen to me here, fair enough, but all the governors and teachers and parents who are joining me in saying not against the principle of this policy in motion, but against the technicalities of it. Thank you. I'd like you to vote down the motion.
Thank you. Can I ask Joshua Lugria-Elliott to stand by after the interventions? And we have 5 more people on interventions. That's Chris Brown, Charles Tucker, Joy Rosensteel, Chris Rouse and Evan Mortimer. If you could go to the intervention mic. And can we start first with Lee Darg for the interventions? Thank you. You have 1 minute intervention. Lee Darg. David Graham.
I'm speaking out against, and I urge you to vote against Amendment 1. The difficulty with home-educated children and children in unregistered schools is that they're not on the radar. One doesn't know if one has concerns about whether they're receiving the optimal support and a broad curriculum, etc., unless someone is checking and is visiting that home and taking an interest in that child. So, well-intentioned though the amendment is, it doesn't actually address the issue, which is that one needs these children to be on the radar of the local authority to ensure that every child receives an effective and empowering education. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian Herrellet-Trett, thank you.
Good morning, Conference. I just want to refer to lines 61 to 63 of the motion. I know that we have a very inclusive LGBT plus sex and relationship education policy. We have supported and campaigned for that over very many years. However, I felt this policy paper didn't really do its justice in enhancing this and using this as a campaigning tool to make sure this policy gets out. Our lords and baronesses and peers are working very hard to push the government on this, and at the moment we have a change of education minister who is less interested in some of the aspects around LGBT inclusive sex and relationship education than the previous minister. So I think everyone needs to push this much more harder than we have been doing so. Thank you very much.
Kelly Marie Blundell.
I want to commend Amendment 3. Equality is enshrined in our Constitution, and it is right that we promote gender equality and neutrality in schools. It was in my constituency, Lewes, last year that Lewes Primary School announced that they would be moving to gender-neutral uniforms. Predictably, the Daily Mail was outraged. Piers Morgan had gone to that school. However, as Jess herself said, we are not here to simply outrage the Daily Mail. We are here to promote gender neutrality. It specifically addresses the current issues of inequality and indecency in schools by having a gender-neutral uniform. Conference, please support Amendment 3.
Thank you. Next is Chris Brown.
Thank you, Conference. I want to speak in favour of Amendment 1. I, along with many other home educators, are concerned that the current policy paper on home education will make Liberal Democrats the most state interventionist out of all the major political parties. This is something I'd expect of the Labour Party, not the Liberal Democrats. It's of particular concern that it perpetrates damaging myths that home educated children are invisible and at risk, when the reality is that most home-educated children are as active, very visible members of their communities, and evidence shows that they are no more at risk of being home-educated than their school peers. Children at home are protected by and safeguarded by the same mechanisms as children who are under 5, and these systems work well as long as local children's services are funded, staffed, and trained adequately. It would raise issues under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights and other human rights provisions, with forced biannual visits creating unprecedented power for the state to intrude in the private lives of families, also causing distress to many children. It's out.
Thank you. Next is Charles Tucker. Thank you.
Thank you. Our education system is failing to improve social mobility in far too many cases. The obsession with league tables allows whole cohorts of underachieving students to pass through our schools with no higher expectation of achievement than their parents. If our education system is to make a real difference to social mobility, shouldn't we be looking at actual achievement post-schooling in assessing the school performance? Now, I'm a councillor from a district council, Wychavon in Worcestershire, that came 15th from the bottom for social mobility in the Social Mobility Commission report last November. It's not an inner city, it's a well-off rural area. Can we look at how the social mobility rankings are determined? They're very heavily weighted by the achievement of children on free school meals at Key Stage 2. Those children in Wychavon, only 13% of the children on free school meals at that stage achieve the...
Thank you. Next, Joy Rosenstiel. Thank you.
I want to draw attention to the continuing uncertainty that Britain's state nursery schools are facing. In 2016-17, over 30,000 people signed a petition to Parliament expressing their concern about funding proposals. We were promised by the then Secretary of State that we were given the funding as it is now until 2020, and that there would be further consultation on the future of these schools. One general election and a Secretary of State of Education later, we are still waiting for that consultation. I would like to ask our education spokesman in the House of Commons to press the Secretary of State to do that consultation, because unless it is done, by 2020, Britain's nursery schools will be closing and we will be losing what has been called the jewel in the crown of British education.
Thank you. The next is Chris Rouse.
I'm speaking in support of scrapping SATs and what we put in place of them. I strongly believe that the motion to scrap SATs is essential. I became increasingly aware of the importance that was being placed on SATs and that it was restricting the breadth of the curriculum in the primary school, let alone the detrimental impact it was having on children, teachers and parents. Abolishing SATs, I believe that tests only work when they are measuring the child and its needs, not testing teachers and schools. Abolishing SATs is easy. The difficulty is finding the most accurate method of informing the child, parent and secondary school of the progress made at primary school, the standard achieved and the next steps. That's why teacher assessment and a lighter touch standardised test should be included in the policy to ensure both consistency and accuracy in a way that does not increase a teacher's workload or place undue pressure on a child. These tests would be implemented and the results used in a very different way to the current system of SATs. The education of a primary school child benefits from a good relationship.
Thank you very much for that. And then the final one, Evan Mortimer. So can I ask Joshua Lugrio Elliott to stand by after the interventions? Thank you.
Conference, I'm speaking in support of Amendment 3 because if I'd realised that I was non-binary before my mid-20s, I would have been directly affected by these issues. As it was, without fully realising why it made me uncomfortable, I had to wear a skirt at school, in primary school and the first year or two of secondary school. Now, over a decade later, and fully understanding who I am, the thought of wearing a skirt is unthinkable for me. If I was forced to wear one when I began university full-time in September, it would make me uncomfortable and dysphoric enough to severely impact my education. Thankfully, of course, that won't be the case for me. Yet this is the reality for transgender children and young people every single day. As it stands, in schools with a gendered uniform code, trans kids have to out themselves to ask to wear the uniform they're most comfortable with. And for some children, this is not a safe option due to parents with transphobic attitudes. Gender-neutral uniform gives these young people a chance to wear the clothes that makes them comfortable without coming out. So this amendment is vitally important for some of the most vulnerable children in our schools. Please support it.
Thank you very much. And that completes the interventions. And can I ask Mona Chowdhury to stand by? And I now call Joshua Lugrio Elliott to speak for the motion as a whole.
Good morning, conference. As a working class boy, I have come from an environment where most of my friends we went to a comprehensive school, and most of my friends wanted to be roofers, they wanted to be carpenters, they wanted to go into industries where you didn't require English and maths. This is why this motion today makes me proud to be a Liberal Democrat. As a first-time speaker here, it's different for me, and I'd like to say to all of you that this motion is needed. Students today in not only primary school, but in secondary school, are tested on theory. They're not tested on their practical ability to work. They're not tested on their practical ability to set up businesses. They're not tested on their practical ability to do roofing, and that is wrong. So the Liberal Democrats bringing RSE into education, bringing more citizenship, and bringing more practical elements to an education system which is currently proving to be broken is vital. I am 17 years old and I'm the director of a company. My company has had no financial assistance. My company has had no financial assistance from the government, and my school has taught me nothing about financial capability. Everything that we learn in school is about maths, English, science, all things that you don't need. Creativity makes you an entrepreneur. You don't necessarily need these specific theoretical subjects. I believe that governments should be subsidising young people's businesses, young people's creativity, and building an element of practicality in our education system. If I was given money by the government to set up my business and I was 16, my business would have been so much easier. I can't even apply for a loan until I'm 18. I can't go to a bank and get a loan. I don't even know, as a 16-year-old, how to set up a business. You have to learn it yourself, which is why I believe that schools should be teaching their students how to set up businesses, how to be financially capable, and learning about the business world as a whole. This is why it makes me proud to be a Liberal Democrat, and I urge everyone here, everyone, to pass this motion. Thank you.
Right, could I ask Rachel McGann to stand by, and can I call Mona Chowdhury to speak against the motion as a whole? Mona Chowdhury to speak against the motion as a whole? No? Yes? Mona Chowdhury is a first-time speaker.
I'm so sorry I had to rush from a workshop that I was attending, so excuse me that I'm kind of... Yes, friends at Liberal Democrats, Leila Moran, lend me your ears. I come to praise home education, having home educated my son until 8 years of age. He is currently a pupil at Winchester College, There has been a 365% increase in the number of children receiving home education in this country over the past decade. I believe there are 3 key points this party should focus on. Number 1, the Education Act 1996 affords parents the unhindered right to provide their children with home education, with the minimum interference or diktat by the state. Policy Paper 128 calls for greater supervision of the home educated, citing cases of children who have come to serious harm because they were home educated. Any such cases represent a tiny minority of home educated children. There are many more examples of children in registered schools who have had serious harm visited upon them. We should not permit overcautious concerns to place undue burden or interference on home educators. Number 2, Policy Paper 128 suggests biannual visits by local authority representatives to ensure children are being educated in line with the national curriculum. The national curriculum is a far from perfect system, and home educators should not be bound by it. Let us learn by comparative study of home education in other jurisdictions. I successfully applied the Scandinavian method in educating my son. Number 3, does the party really believe that with local authority spending cuts throughout the country, that local authorities will have the resources to employ staff with the appropriate expertise to perform a supervisory educational role? In short, I propose that the party rethink its stance on home education in Policy Paper 128. It presents something of a knee-jerk reaction to an over-inflated concern about the safety of home-educated children. The party should consult with home educators to learn from their experiences, both in this country and overseas. We need to focus on help and support for those parents who exercise their legal right to home education. As Liberals, we should think carefully before advocating greater state intervention on an area of education which is presently free from it. Let us embrace the positives that home education can bring to society and the economy without becoming transfixed by the negatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Stephanie Spruce to stand by? And I now call Rachel McCann to speak for the motion as a whole from Central Bedfordshire.
Good afternoon, conference. As a primary school teacher and as a parent of school-aged children, a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old and a 17-year-old, I am keenly aware of some of the major problems that are being faced by education in this country today. We have a serious recruitment and retention crisis. Some people will try to tell you that in order to recruit more teachers, more pay is required. I'm not going to say no to more pay, but frankly, most teachers do not go into this profession for the money. We become teachers because we want to make a difference. We care about the children and we want to see them grow, thrive and succeed. These days, however, many of us are so hamstrung by paperwork, by over-involved marking schemes, by constant assessment, by continual preparation and readiness for the dreaded Ofsted visit, that we barely get time to do the part of the job we became teachers for, helping our children and young people to learn. If you teach in Year 2 or Year 6, you are further constrained by the need to prepare your children for SATs. And I don't just mean preparing them academically, but also preparing them emotionally and teaching them resilience to get through these things. Why? Why are we subjecting, in the case of Key Stage 1 SATs, 6- and 7-year-old children to these tests? Who does it benefit? Here's a clue. It's not the children. It's not the teachers either, and I don't believe it helps the parents. I'm also going to mention GCSEs. These have also caused a profound impact. My eldest child sat those new changes last year. Very stressful. Still many debates about what is actually a pass now on English and maths. Is it a 4? Is it a 5? What will universities accept? What will sixth forms accept? Her sixth form has changed its mind in the course of the last 6 months. A 4 is no longer good enough, you have to get a 5. The funding cuts of Tories are having a real impact. In the past few years, I have had to fund basic school supplies for my class, including whiteboard pens, books, basic resources every class should have. We are also in the midst of a technical and digital revolution. As a country, if we do not adequately fund education, our children risk falling behind. That doesn't just fail those children, which is bad enough, it fails us all. I commend this motion and ask you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I ask Toby Keynes to stand by? And I now call Stephanie Spruce to speak for Amendment 1.
Thank you. I'm also a first-time speaker. I'd like to say before I start that the policy before us is a massive step forward in most respects. For example, the reforms to SATs and Ofsted will go a long way to reduce stress and anxiety in pupils and staff alike. However, one area of this document concerns me, and it is why I'm supporting Amendment 1 today. I have a mental disability. I have Asperger's syndrome, which is on the autistic spectrum, and my eldest daughter is also suspected of the same. I'm also a home educator. SEND children or children with special educational needs make a large number of those that are home educated, especially in my area of Birmingham. Some are deregistered from the school they are in due to bullying or complex needs being unable to be met. Others, like our family, are home educated because we as parents chose it as the best educational setting for our children, after careful consideration of the local schools and the local private schools. As is my duty under Section 7 of the Education Act 1966, which states that it is a parent's duty to provide an education suitable for their age, ability and aptitude at school or otherwise. For some children, especially SEND children, an education may be suitable, but it may not keep up or may require a different approach to the national curriculum.
and I feel that this part of the policy seems in opposition to the rest of the paper. In most households, a child's home is their safe space. It is true especially for SEND children who may need space to wind down in a predictable environment. A strange person entering the home to ask questions of them and their parents could have a profound and traumatic effect. My daughter, for instance, finds it hard to cope with change and would find it very uncomfortable and intimidating if a person was to come in and do so. I do believe it would interfere with her right to enjoy a private family life, and I do not believe we should take this motion lightly unless there is reasonable suspicion there is a problem. As with social services, would not go in unless there was a reasonable concern for a child's welfare. As with home educators, we are out every day going to groups, both social and more structured, such as our local gymnastics centre, who run 3 home education classes a week. There are many opportunities for children to be seen and suspicions raised, and I do not agree that these children are invisible. Currently, the local authority has a duty to inquire about the provision of any child not on the school roll. They normally make informal inquiries, and if the child is home educated, the family would be talked to by the elective home education team. They initially also make informal inquiries, usually a written report, or they will meet with the parent, and this can be at home or at a neutral venue, which Amendment 1 supports, and would be a better option for my daughter, such as a library, where she would feel more comfortable talking to somebody she didn't know. And there are safeguards, and if the local authority is not satisfied, they can make further formal inquiries, and a school attendance order can be issued under Section 437 of the Education Act. Therefore, please provide support for Amendment 1 for children such as my daughter, so that we can have an open, fair and tolerant education system for everybody as Liberal Democrats.
Can I ask Matthew Holbert to stand by? And I now call Toby Keynes from Croydon to speak against Amendment 1.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Conference. Homeschooling and illegal unregistered schools aren't mentioned in the policy motion itself, but the policy paper devotes a page to them, page 33, section 9. So if you pass the motion without the Amendment 1, the proposals in the policy paper will become party policy, and we will have a strong policy on home education and on illegal unregistered schools. And as David Weston has said, it will strengthen the support that is available to homeschoolers. Now, there's a problem. The word homeschooling, it's a bit misleading. It actually covers any child kept out of the state and the private education school system. It covers parents who educate their children at home, some of them here this afternoon, and some of them do this for the best of reasons, many of them, and to the best of their abilities, and they work with the local authority to get the best for their child. I'd love to have the time to tell you about my friends who've been home educating their son, but I don't have the time. This motion supports those parents. But homeschooling also covers parents who send their children to illegal, unregistered schools, where the writ of law does not run, where the children may be in a physically unsafe or unhealthy environment, where beating may be part of the daily regime. The policy paper's proposals on homeschooling will help local authorities to discover the children who are going to those schools. And homeschooling, the term, also covers those hopelessly inadequate parents who don't see any need to educate their children, can't and won't do it themselves, and won't allow anyone else to do it for them. And it also covers the parents who want to isolate their children from the outside world because they want to have absolute control over their children's lives and futures. And it covers parents who physically abuse their children. These are all children who need protecting. Amendment 1 will not protect the children. It will protect the parents. Parents do not and cannot have absolute control of their children. Children have rights. They cannot stand up for themselves. The state needs to be able to do so for them. And for that, the local authority needs to know they exist. It needs to be able to visit the parents and the children and discuss their education, even if that's only every 2 years, and especially when the children don't want them to. The policy paper achieves this. Amendment 1 calls this arbitrary or unlawful interference. It is not. It's protecting the basic rights of the children. Amendment 1 would mean that local authority would not be able to talk to the parents unless it already has cause for concern. Please support a strong policy for children. Please don't allow Amendment 1 to strip away essential safeguards. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask Roger Putnam to stand by? And I now call Matthew Holbert to speak for the motion of as a whole from Bosworth.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Conference. I want to welcome something which is in the policy paper but not on the face of the motion itself, that being the important role of what takes place outside of school in terms of out-of-school activities and the positive impact they can have in building confidence, wider skills and helping to ensure our young people become good citizens to make a positive contribution to wider society. I'm pleased to see that the policy paper restates our long-standing commitment to a statutory youth service, last confirmed in a motion I happened to move at Autumn Conference in 2015. Within the last couple of weeks, Labour has finally, and to much fanfare, also committed to the need for statutory funding for the youth service. Now, on a cross-party basis, I welcome this, but once again, where Lib Dems lead, others follow. Since 2010, that's the good Lib Dem bit. Now comes a little bit where perhaps we could have done a bit better. Since 2010, and for 5 of those years, we were in government, so I'm afraid, folks, we have to take some of the responsibility for this. Council-run youth services have been decimated up and down the country. Universal provision has all but disappeared, leaving only small pockets of targeted work in most places. Faced with such a pitiful funding settlement from central government, especially since 2015, and with currently no statutory requirement to provide a youth service, local authorities of all political colours have found them an easy and tempting thing to axe. And despite calls for them to do so, Tory ministers haven't stepped in to provide extra funding, choosing instead to plough billions into its pet youth project, the National Citizen Service, the value for money of which has been called into question by a parliamentary committee. And I'd like to pay tribute to Baroness Liz Barker for being one of the very few parliamentarians to properly hold NCS to account for the money it spends. I welcome the call in the policy paper for NCS's resources to be redirected to help plug the gaps in provision across the country. NCS does good work, don't get me wrong, but a few weeks of activities each summer does not make up for the loss of an all-year-round, out-of-school universal youth service. I'm proud that it's Lib Dem activists and councillors up and down the country, including Jude Deakin in Chelmsford, Linda Jack in Bedford, and Emily Smith, fantastic, who we've heard from already today in Oxford, that are fighting to protect these vitally needed services. Youth workers at their best are able to reach young people that formal structures like schools often can't. But the work of youth workers can help, by building trust and confidence over time, a young person do better and achieve more when back in the classroom. That's just one reason why this is so important. Youth work can and does not only change lives, but also save them, ensuring young people who might otherwise take a wrong turn stay on the straight and narrow. The Mayor of London, to be fair to him, has recognised the value of youth work, and that's the end of my time. Please support this motion. Support youth work.
Thank you. Can I ask Bill Revens to stand by, and I ask Roger Putnam to come to the stage from Copeland and Wokinton to speak for the motion as a whole.
Good afternoon, Conference. I think it's been a very good motion. I hope you'll endorse it. But it's primarily been concerned with management and administration of the education service rather than the content of what is taught and how it is taught. And there's one aspect one approach to learning, which I just want to speak on. Other speakers have already mentioned this, and that is known as learning outside the classroom. And there is now an organisation, you may not have heard of it, called the Council for Learning Outside the Classroom. Just a section of its mandate. It believes that every young person should experience the world beyond the classroom as an essential part of their learning and personal development, whatever their age, ability, or circumstances. And it is a fact, I think, that for many children, the classroom itself can be a place of frustration rather than growth. I've seen some astonishing work done, often in the outdoors, but outside the classroom, to build the confidence and self-esteem of young people, often with serious learning and behavioural problems. Many of you, I dare say, have seen the same. Time outside the classroom is vital. It can take many forms. Visits to galleries and museums, nature walks or pond dipping, growing plants and vegetables in school grounds, environmental projects of other sorts, outdoor adventure activities, camping and expeditions, work experience too. All these provide real-life experience, experiential learning, bringing the benefits of both formal and informal education together, acquiring knowledge and skills through practical hands-on experience, and often learning to cope with failure as well as success. And that is one of the major sources, of course, of individual learning. I would also like to emphasize the special value of residential programs and experiences. They are not mentioned at all, either in the motion or in the policy paper, but that means time away from school and home with a purposeful program, a flexible program of exciting and challenging adventures and experiences. There needs also, associated with that, to be a very effective program and technique for reviewing those experiences to extract the maximum learning from them. There are many difficulties. Funding, obviously. Residential centres that were once funded by LEAs, as they were called, are now independent and required to charge for their courses, and that excludes many of those who would gain the most from the experience.
Can you draw your remarks to a close, please?
I didn't see the light. My hope and request is that the Lib Dems will endorse and encourage the provision of out-of-classroom experiences. Layla Moran gave some very positive indications that the way in which education is delivered needs to be wide-ranging. Thank you.
As we've had no speakers against Amendment 2, 3 and 4, I ask Lucy Nessinger to stand by, and I call Bill Revens to sum up on Amendment 1.
Thank you, Liz. I am a first-time speaker, but it's taken me 30 years of party membership to get this far. I was incredibly excited to read this policy paper. Enthusiastic. It is so good. Less regulation, more trust. The centre of the child in everything throughout its pages was brilliant. And I speak as a teacher with 25 years' experience. I speak as a member of the Education Policy Group as well. I speak as a Somerset County Councillor. And most importantly, I speak as a parent of 3 children who went through comprehensive education, happy and successful in their outcomes. But I'm concerned by page 33. It does not fit with the tone of the document. First of all, to conflate home education and illegal schools in the same section, that is sending all the wrong messages to home educators around the country. David reliably tells us that we've heard lots from home educators in putting together this policy. But in Somerset, we have 1,000 home educators, and Gideon and I have heard from some of them who tell me they aren't happy with the wording of this policy document. And I'm very concerned that we will lose their support as people who, by their very nature, are against conformity. So why are we putting this policy forward? David says this amendment is well-meaning, but actually the whole purpose was to put more support in for home educators. Well, I've gone back and looked at page 33, David. I'm really sorry, but the word support is not there. It does not talk about supporting home education at all. It talks about supervision, greater supervision. So why is this needed? Well, the Education Act 1996 gives local authorities the power to monitor home educators. And that is a more constructive power than 2 snapshot inspections when an act can be put on. There is checking of quality. This policy will bring about more bureaucracy. Home education is about less bureaucracy. It is about more personalisation. Educated students' experience are more experiential. In the paper, it talks about homeschooled children being more vulnerable to abuse. But the evidence does not back this up. 1.3% of children in the general population are on the risk register, but only 0.3% of home-educated children. And if we look at mainstream schools, in 2017, 653 teachers were prosecuted for putting children at risk. I estimate that this policy would cost about 250 million to bring in. Perhaps that money could be put towards supporting those students who've been affected by cuts in SEND and mental health support that has led to home education going up by 26%. This is an outstanding policy paper, but it's blighted by an ill-thought-out, expensive and bureaucratic and damaging policy. The amendment changes it, it softens it, it makes it more liberal. It does not talk about illegal schools. It does not talk about authoritarian visits into school or whatever was suggested. Read the amendment before you speak on it, perhaps. This policy, I think at the bottom of it, is a suspicion of people who are a little bit different.
Can you draw your remarks to a close?
I thought we were a party that didn't want to be enslaved by conformity. Thank you.
As I said before, as Amendment 2, 3 and 4 were not opposed, I'm not calling anyone to summate on those. So I call Lucy Nesslinger to sum up on the main motion. Thank you.
Conference. Education is at the heart of a liberal society. It is what frees individuals, giving them the knowledge of the world and of themselves that will allow them to make informed choices throughout their lives. I'm proud of this education policy we are voting on today, and I'm enormously grateful to all those who have helped develop it. Mentioning names is always a mug's game on an occasion like this, but I must thank the members of the working group, some of whom have given up an enormous amount of their time, and also the Liberal Democrat Education Association, who have been hugely supportive throughout the development of this policy. This education policy puts children and communities at the centre of education, rather than statistics and tests. I was surprised yesterday to find that many of the issues raised in the policy were being supported by the director of the CBI. I'm delighted that the damage the Michael Gove and Nick Gibb model of education is doing to our system is being recognised by employers as well as by parents and teachers. Education should be a journey of joyous discovery, with children being introduced to the wonders of science, the delights of literature, art and music. Our children need to be inspired with a lifelong love of learning and the confidence to go into the world, to explore and challenge and make society a better place. Yet this is not the vision of education that seems to pervade the current system. I went into teaching in 1996, soon after the introduction of Ofsted. At that time, there was a confidence and enthusiasm in the teaching profession which is much rarer today. Schools were full of senior teachers confident in their ability after years of relative freedom to teach how and what they wanted to. Over the subsequent 22 years, Teachers have been given ever harsher and closer instruction on what to teach and how to teach, and pupils have faced more and more testing. It is time we returned to an education system which trusts teachers as professionals and allows schools the freedom to inspire their pupils. For too many years, we have seen arts subjects squeezed out of the curriculum. The number of pupils taking arts subjects at A-level has been falling fast, and yet the creative arts are a huge sector of our economy. Equally importantly, the creativity and exploration has been squeezed out of all other subjects. My son is taking his GCSEs this year. He is hugely keen on science. He reads Stephen Hawking and the physics of black holes in his free time, and yet he is hating his science classes because they are entirely filled with rote learning. This is not inspiring the young scientists or engineers of the future. Our education system is not just boring our young people. There are clear signs it is damaging their health. The constant stress of high-stakes testing from 6 to 18 may well be a major cause of the huge increase in mental health problems in children and young people. The scale of the mental health crisis must not be underestimated, and there are clear peaks in self-harm statistics in the months before exams. There is a need not only to improve the relationship between schools and health services to better support young people, but also to tackle a system which is driving up stress levels among both pupils and teachers to intolerable levels. With teacher recruitment and retention at crisis levels, things cannot go on as they are. By replacing Ofsted, which has become a toxic brand feared across the education sector, this policy signals a clear move to a system where teachers are trusted to teach and inspire young people. Now to come to Amendment 1. I want to reassure those who have expressed concern over what this policy says about homeschooling. I recognise what Bill said about the tone, and I must reassure you, Conference, as Liberals, we are fully supportive of the rights of parents to homeschool their children. Homeschool children as a group do extremely well, and the vast majority of parents who choose to homeschool their children do a brilliant job. This policy will not stop that. We are not expecting homeschool children to follow the national curriculum. All we are asking is that parents respect the slimmed-down curriculum, which we believe should be all children's entitlement. Children growing up in England today need to understand the rights of others and their rights and responsibilities in a tolerant society with many differing views. The visits which are mentioned in the policy are meant to be a check that all is well, not an intrusive test. I wish such checks were not necessary, but I am afraid we must recognise that while the vast majority of parents have their children's welfare at the centre of their lives, there is a tiny minority who abuse their children. Where children attend school, warning signs of abuse can be picked up. But for homeschool children, there is a danger that abuse could slip under the radar. And yes, the numbers are tiny, but we do have a duty to those children, however few they are. This policy gives local authorities the right to insist on seeing a child twice a year. And I'm afraid that in a small minority of cases, there is a need to insist on such visits, and the policy does not specify where these visits should occur. The need for such visits is supported by those working in social care and by the NSPCC. Conference, I hope you will reject Amendment 1. Education is not just a matter of what is taught in classrooms. As Matthew, Emily and Ian have drawn attention to, that there is a huge importance for out-of-school activities and youth work. There is a well-known saying, it takes a village to raise a child. But recent reforms have dramatically reduced the connections between schools and their communities. With the massive increase in the power of multi-academy trusts, the role of parents and the wider community in schools has been whittled away. This policy gives back rights to both local authorities, the democratically accountable bodies who should be responsible for maintaining high standards, and to parents and communities. And I'm delighted that Amendment 2 reinforces the emphasis on the role of local authorities. I hope you will support it. I'm also delighted that Jess and Zoe have brought Amendment 3 to raise the serious issues of uniforms and equality as an equality and an LGBT issue. I'm delighted that Janet and Helen have raised the issue of funding for post-16 education. Our sixth form colleges are a crucial bridge between school education and the world of work. Sixth form colleges and post-16 education has faced some of the harshest cuts in recent years, and yet the work they do for young people and with young people and employers is critical to the success of our economy. So I ask you to support Amendment 4. And finally, to support this motion, which puts children and parents and communities back at the heart of education. And I hope that after you've supported it, and I hope you will, I urge you to go out and campaign in local and regional and national elections so that Layla Moran can really have her dream job and put it into practice. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to a series of votes, which you can find on page 12 and 13 of Conference Daily. Can you show the voting side to me, so I can see voting rather than your picture? Okay, thank you. Although I'm sure some of your pictures are wonderful. So can I see all those in favour of Amendment 1, please show. All those against? That is clearly defeated. All those in favour of Amendment 2, please show. All those against? That is clearly passed. Amendment 3, all those in favour, please show. All those against? Again, that is clearly passed. Amendment 4, please show. Those against? That was clearly passed. And now moving to the final vote on the motion as a whole. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That was clearly passed. Thank you very much, everyone. We now move to the lunch break.